Hey guys, tonight we're stepping aboard a 19th century American whaling ship. And I should probably warn you right now, the romance you're imagining from Moby Dick is about to get crushed beneath the reality of tar, blood, and the very real possibility that you'll lose a limb before breakfast. Picture this. It's 1851. You're standing on a creaking dock in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and before you looms a wooden vessel that smells like death marinated in whale oil. The adventure of a lifetime? Maybe. A floating coffin that'll test every limit of human endurance? Absolutely. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how this channel reaches people in every time zone, from Auckland to Amsterdam. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The gangplank flexes under your boots as you step aboard the Patience, a three-masted bark fresh from her previous voyage and barely cleaned for this one. That's your first lesson. Whaling ships don't get the luxury of dry dock spa treatments between expeditions. The wooden deck beneath your feet is stained dark with what you hope is just tar and salt water, though the reddish-brown patches tell a different story. Above you, a forest of ropes, spars and canvas forms a complicated web that might as well be written in ancient Greek, for all you understand it right now. Your sea chest thuds onto the deck beside you. Everything you own for the next 2 to 4 years crammed into a box smaller than a modern carry-on suitcase. 2 shirts, 1 pair of spare trousers, a blanket your mother wept over while packing, a Bible you probably won't read, and a spare pair of socks that'll be rotted through with damp within a month. You signed the ship's articles this morning in the shipping agent's office, your hands shaking slightly as you committed to a lay. Your share of the profits, that'll work out to roughly nothing if this voyage goes badly. The captain gets 1/15 of the net proceeds. You, green hand extraordinaire, get 1/200th. Do the math on that one while you're swabbing the deck at midnight. The smell hits you in waves, each one worse than the last. There's the expected ocean brine, sure, but layered over it like some unholy perfume comes the reek of old whale oil that's soaked into every plank and rope. Beneath that, something organic and rotting, probably the remnants of the last whale they processed, bits of blubber and blood that have found their way into cracks and crevices too small to properly clean. And threading through it all, the sharp bite of tar, the musty funk of unwashed men living in close quarters, and a whiff of the bilge water sloshing somewhere deep in the hold. It's the kind of smell that'll cling to your clothes, your hair, your skin, until you can't remember what fresh air even tastes like. Welcome to aromatherapy, 1850s style. The ship rocks gently at her moorings, and you grab a nearby rope to steady yourself, only to have your hand come away black with tar. A sailor passing by, identified by the way he moves across the tilted deck like he was born there, laughs at your expression. "First time afloat, is it?" he calls, not unkindly. "You'll get your sea legs soon enough, or you'll spend the voyage hanging over the rail feeding the fish." Comforting. You're standing roughly where the main deck meets the quarterdeck, that raised section at the stern where officers pace and make important decisions, while you'll spend your time doing whatever back-breaking labour they devise. The Patience stretches about 110 feet from bow to stern, roughly the length of 3 school buses parked end to end, if that helps you visualise it. She's maybe 28 feet at her widest point, and into this space they've crammed enough supplies for 30 men to survive for years, plus all the equipment needed to kill, process and store dozens of whales. Historians still argue whether the typical whaling vessel of this era was overpacked to dangerous levels, or whether captains simply understood spatial efficiency better than we give them credit for. But standing here on deck, you're leaning toward criminally overcrowded. The sun is sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would be romantic if you weren't actively questioning every life choice that brought you here. Other crew members are hauling aboard last-minute supplies, barrels of flour, crates of hardtack, coils of rope that look thick enough to tow a building. You should probably help, but nobody's told you what to do yet, and you've learned from your brief time in town that doing the wrong thing on a ship is worse than doing nothing at all. A quirky detail. Your ship carries approximately 200 barrels just for storing the whale oil you haven't even caught yet. Those empty barrels are currently stacked in the hold like the world's most optimistic game of Tetris, waiting to be filled with liquid gold, or liquid lamp fuel technically, but gold in terms of what it'll fetch in port. American whaling in the 1850s is an industry worth roughly $10 million annually, which translates to something like $350 million in today's money. You're part of an economic powerhouse, even if your personal cut wouldn't buy you a decent dinner. Around you, the organised chaos of departure preparations continues. Men you don't know shout things you don't understand. Somewhere a boatswain's whistle pipes a command. The captain, you haven't met him yet, but you'll recognise him by the way everyone else gets out of his way, is presumably in his cabin, reviewing charts or writing in the ship's log or doing whatever godlike beings do before a voyage. Your adventure is beginning whether you're ready or not, and based on the way your stomach is already churning just from the gentle harbour swell, you're definitely not ready. A hand claps down on your shoulder, and you nearly jump out of your skin. You there? Green hand? The voice belongs to a weathered man with skin like tanned leather, and an expression suggesting he's already tired of you. That your dunnage? He nods toward your sea chest. You confirm that yes, those are your worldly possessions. Well, get it below before someone tosses it overboard for being in the way. Down that hatch, all the way forward to the forecastle. You'll know it by the smell. This, you're learning rapidly, is your life now. Everyone aboard this ship knows more than you, ranks higher than you, and isn't shy about letting you know it. The whaling ship operates on a hierarchy more rigid than medieval feudalism, and you've just joined as essentially a serf with none of the land rights. At the very top sits Captain Mordecai Barnes, a man you glimpsed earlier on the quarterdeck. Grey-bearded, silent, radiating an authority that doesn't require shouting. The captain is judge, jury, and occasionally executioner of ship's discipline. His word is literally law once you're more than 3 miles from shore, which is the official boundary where Admiralty law kicks in. He takes his meals alone in the cabin, sleeps in an actual bed with sheets, and earns that 15th lay by shouldering responsibility for every soul aboard and the success or failure of the entire expedition. You will speak to him approximately never unless you've done something catastrophically wrong. Below the captain stand the 3 mates, first, second, and third. The first mate, Mr. Coffin, yes, really, and no, you don't comment on it, is the captain's enforcer and the ship's operational manager. He's the one who'll be shouting at you during emergencies, assigning your watch rotations, and generally making sure you don't accidentally kill yourself or someone else through incompetence. The second and third mates handle their own watches and command the other whaleboats when you actually spot your quarry. These men earn between 35th and 50th lays, which sounds terrible until you remember your 200th situation. Then come the specialists, the boat headers and harpooners, men whose skill with an iron-tipped spear from a pitching whaleboat determines whether this voyage ends in profit or poverty. These are the rock stars of whaling, often immigrants from the Azores or Cape Verde, Portuguese speakers who've perfected the art of standing in a boat's bow and driving a harpoon into a creature that could smash them to splinters. Historians still argue whether American whaling ships specifically recruited foreign harpooners for their skill, or simply because Americans considered the job too dangerous, but regardless, these men command respect and lays around 1 ton 75th. They're probably the only crew members who'll look at you without immediate contempt. After the harpooners, you've got the skilled seaman, the carpenter, the cooper, barrel maker, absolutely essential on a whaling ship, the steward who serves the captain and officers, and the cook. These men have actual trades and earn actual respect, plus lays that beat yours by a comfortable margin. The carpenter keeps the ship from literally falling apart. The cooper maintains and manufactures the hundreds of barrels that store your liquid profit. The cook murders food 3 times daily but at least provides hot coffee. Each is more valuable than you. Below them sit the ordinary seamen, men who've done this before, who know the ropes, literally, who can hand, reef and steer without being told twice. They might only pull 150th lays, but they've got experience, competence and the luxury of knowing what they're doing. You envy them desperately, and then there's you, the green hand, the landsman, the completely inexperienced, probably going to get someone killed, definitely going to embarrass himself newcomer who doesn't know port from starboard and thinks a sheet is something you sleep under rather than a rope controlling a sail. There are maybe 3 or 4 other green hands aboard, and together you form the bottom tier of this floating society. Your job is to do whatever anyone tells you, learn fast enough not to be dangerous, and try not to die before you figure out which end of the ship goes first. Here's a fun quirk about the whaling industry's labour structure. Your lay isn't calculated on gross profits, but net proceeds after the ship's owners deduct expenses. And guess what counts as expenses? Everything. The food you eat, the slops, clothing. You'll need to buy from the ship's stores when yours wear out. Any advances you took against future earnings, tobacco if you chew it, even the medicine used to treat you when you inevitably get injured. By the time the owners finish their creative accounting, green hand lays often amount to actual debt rather than profit. You've essentially signed up for indentured servitude with extra scurvy. The weathered sailor who directed you below appears again, hauling a coil of rope over his shoulder. Name's Tucker, he offers, which passes for friendliness aboard ship. Been whaling 6 years. Word of advice: stay out of Mr. Coffin's sight unless you're working, never touch anything on the quarterdeck, and if the captain speaks to you, say yes, sir, and nothing else. He pauses, eyeing you with something approaching sympathy. You read and write. You nod. Good. Keep a journal if you're smart, helps pass the time, and if you survive, you'll want to remember this, though maybe not the smell. Someone shouts for hands to haul on a line. You don't know what line or why, but you recognize the universal tone of move your ass. You hurry toward the sound, nearly tripping over a coil of rope that apparently lives exactly where you wanted to step. Welcome to the bottom of the food chain, Green Hand. The only direction from here is up, assuming you survive long enough to climb. The ship's bell clangs 8 times, a sound you'll come to recognize as marking the end of a 4-hour watch, though right now it's just noise. Mr. Coffin's voice booms across the deck. All hands! Muster at the mainmast! You follow the general movement of bodies toward the middle of the ship, where the massive mainmast rises from the deck like a tree trunk that's forgotten it's been cut down and turned into maritime infrastructure. 30 men arrange themselves in a loose semicircle, and you notice the natural sorting that happens. Officers toward the back, experienced hands in the middle, green hands like you hovering uncertainly at the edges. The first mate stands with a ledger, and you realise with creeping dread that this is where your actual work assignment begins. Not tomorrow, not after a good night's sleep. Right now, with the sun barely touching the horizon. Listen sharp, Mr. Coffin barks, and the chatter dies immediately. We'll be running 3 watches, starboard, larboard, and captains. 4 hours on, 8 hours off, rotating through. If you don't know your watch assignment by the time I'm done, you're an idiot and you'll be swabbing the head until you figure it out. He starts reading names, and here's where your complete ignorance of maritime vocabulary becomes a problem. Starboard watch, Jenkins, leadsman, Tucker, fore-top gallant lookout, Morrison, main top. The words wash over you like seawater, meaningless sounds that apparently convey critical information to everyone except you. What's a leadsman? Where's the fore-top gallant? Is main top a place or a job or both? The watch system, you'll eventually learn, is the backbone of shipboard life. 3 watches rotating means that at any given moment, 1/3 of the crew is actively working, 1/3 is resting, and 1/3 is theoretically sleeping, though theoretically is doing heavy lifting in that sentence. The 4 hours on, 8 hours off schedule sounds reasonable, until you realise it means you never get more than 4 consecutive hours of sleep. Your body will exist in a state of permanent exhaustion, catching rest in fragments like a puzzle that never quite completes itself. Larboard watch, Mr. Coffin continues, and you perk up because you think you heard your name. Peterson, aboard the boat. Davis, shipkeeper. Whitmore, that's you, Green Hand, general deck duties. There it is. Your larboard watch, general deck duties, which you suspect is code for whatever miserable job nobody else wants to do. Here's a quirky historical detail that'll make you appreciate modern labour laws. The watch system aboard whaling ships was actually less brutal than the Merchant Marine's traditional watch-and-watch schedule, which split crews into just 2 groups working alternating 4-hour shifts. Whalers adopted the 3-watch system specifically because voyages lasted so long that the 2-watch schedule literally killed crew members from exhaustion. So congratulations, you've signed onto a ship using the more humane schedule, which is still absolutely terrible. The assignments continue in a blur of nautical terminology. Someone's responsible for the main topsail halyard. Another poor soul gets assigned to boxing the compass during their watch, which sounds either violent or geometrical, but probably means neither. You catch terms like bracing the yards, sounding the well, trimming the lamps, and standing dog watches. none of which make any sense. It's like Mr. Coffin is speaking English but rearranging it into a code designed specifically to make landsmen feel stupid. Tucker catches your bewildered expression and leans over to whisper, "Don't worry. General deck duties means you follow whoever's running your watch and do what they say, mostly swabbing, hauling rope, and trying not to fall overboard." This is somehow both reassuring and terrifying. "Larboard watch reports at 8 bells. That's now, gentlemen," Mr. Coffin announces, and approximately 10 men separate from the group, including you. Your watch officer is the third mate, Mr. Sherman, a rangy fellow with hands like gnarled oak roots and a permanently sceptical expression. He looks you over the way someone might examine a questionable fish at market. "Green hands to me," he says, and you shuffle forward along with 2 other unfortunates. "Right. First night I'll keep you where I can see you, which means you'll be holystoning the deck under the lamp. See those?" He points to what look like rectangular bricks made of sandstone. Sand, water, hands, and knees make the deck smooth. 4 hours. Questions? You have approximately 700 questions, but Tucker's advice echoes in your head. "Yes, sir," and nothing else. "No, sir," you manage. "Good. Get to it." And just like that, your first watch begins. You kneel on the deck, which is already pretty smooth in your opinion, but apparently not smooth enough for Mr. Sherman's exacting standards, and start scrubbing with the sandstone block. The work is monotonous, back-breaking, and completely pointless as far as you can tell, which probably means it's character building. Around you, the actual sailors of the larboard watch are doing their assigned tasks with the kind of casual competence that makes you feel even more useless. Historians still argue whether the traditional hazing of green hands through pointless make-work served any actual purpose beyond entertainment for the experienced crew, or whether the boring, repetitive tasks genuinely taught important lessons about attention to detail and following orders. From your position on your hands and knees, scrubbing a deck that was perfectly fine 10 minutes ago, you're firmly in the "this is just hazing" camp. The stars are coming out properly now, sharp and bright against the deepening blue. The harbour water slaps against the hull, with a rhythm that would be soothing if your knees weren't already aching. Somewhere nearby you hear the creaking of the wood, the distant laughter of sailors on another watch, the cry of gulls settling in for the night. 4 hours. You can do 4 hours. Probably. Maybe. You scrub harder and try not to think about the fact that this is literally just your first watch, and you've got years of these ahead of you. Your knees are screaming, and your back feels like someone's been using it as a xylophone when a voice finally breaks your sandstone-induced trance. "Green hand. Supper's up. Get below before it's gone." You look up to find an older sailor, weathered face, missing 2 fingers on his left hand, the kind of injury you're trying very hard not to think about as foreshadowing. Gesturing toward the forward hatch, you abandon your holystone with more enthusiasm than any task has ever been abandoned and follow the general migration of bodies toward the forecastle. The hatch opens onto a ladder, not stairs because ships apparently haven't discovered that brilliant invention, that descends into darkness punctuated by the weak glow of a whale oil lamp. You climb down, and the smell that greets you is like getting punched in the nose by a fist made of body odour, damp wool, and something organic that died a while ago but nobody's found yet. Welcome to your dining room for the next several years. The forecastle, pronounced forecastle by everyone who wants you to know they're proper sailors, occupies the forward section of the ship below deck. It's maybe 20 feet wide at its broadest point and perhaps 15 feet long, with a ceiling so low that anyone over 5'9" has to walk hunched like a question mark. Into this space, they've crammed sleeping quarters, storage, and dining facilities for roughly 20 crew members. If you've ever wondered what a sardine feels like, you're getting the full immersive experience. Hammocks hang from the overhead beams like cocoons, swaying gently with the ship's movement. Sea chests line the walls, doubling as benches. A crude table occupies the centre of the space, just planks laid across supports. And around it, men are already gathering for the evening meal. The lamp swings from a hook, casting shadows that make everyone look vaguely demonic, which honestly matches the aesthetic. You find a spot on a sea chest next to Tucker, who's already tearing into his meal with the enthusiasm of someone who knows better than to expect quality, only quantity. In front of you, someone's placed a tin plate, a battered cup, and utensils that look like they've been used as weapons more than dining implements. The cook, a surly individual named Briggs who seems to take personal offence at the existence of taste buds, is ladling food onto plates with the efficiency of someone performing a prison sentence. Your first whaling ship supper consists of hardtack, salt pork and coffee. Let's start with the hardtack, shall we? These are biscuits in the way that rocks are crunchy. About 3 inches square and half an inch thick, they're made from flour and water, baked until they achieve the consistency of ceramic tile, and designed to last for years without spoiling, which they accomplish by being essentially ineatable from the moment they're made. You're supposed to either soak them in coffee to achieve something approaching chewability, or just gnaw at them like a beaver attacking a particularly stubborn tree. You tap yours experimentally against the table. It makes a sound like knocking on wood. Tucker grins. Give it a few weeks and you'll find the weevils. Then you've got protein. He's joking. You think he's joking. You really hope he's joking. The salt pork is exactly what it sounds like. Pork that's been preserved in so much salt that it's less meat and more salty meat-shaped object. It's been sitting in brine barrels since the ship was provisioned, and will continue sitting in those barrels until someone decides to inflict it upon the crew. The cook has boiled yours, which has the dual effect of making it slightly less rock-hard and absolutely not improving the flavour. It tastes like the ocean decided to become solid and also a pig at the same time. You chew methodically, trying not to think about what fresh food tastes like. Here's a quirky historical tidbit that'll make you appreciate your century. Whaling ships occasionally caught what sailors called slush, the fat that rendered off the salt pork during cooking, and sold it in port as a cooking fat or lubricant. The cook traditionally got to keep the profits from slush sales, which is where we get the term slush fund. You're literally eating the origin of political corruption metaphors. The coffee is generous. It's a brown liquid, arguably hot, containing ingredients that may or may not have once been coffee beans. It tastes like bitterness and regret had a baby, and then that baby fell into a mud puddle. You drink it anyway because it's warm and contains caffeine, both of which feel like luxuries right now. Around the table, conversation flows in the peculiar rhythm of men who've been at sea together before. Stories about previous voyages, complaints about officers, speculation about where the captain will hunt first, the Azores grounds maybe, or straight down to the Brazil banks. You catch references to ships that went down, men who were lost, fortunes made and squandered. It's like listening to a language you almost understand but not quite. How's the deck looking? Someone asks you, grinning. Smooth enough to eat off yet? Smoothest deck in the fleet, you deadpan, which earns you a few chuckles. Small victory. Historians still argue whether the truly abysmal quality of whaling ship food was due to economic necessity, preserving provisions for multi-year voyages with no refrigeration, or whether ship owners and captains simply didn't care about crew welfare beyond keeping them minimally alive. The evidence suggests both factors played a role, with a side helping of, nobody's going to sue us for bad catering in 1851. You finish your meal in relative silence, washing down the last bits of hardtack with the dregs of your coffee. Your stomach isn't exactly satisfied, but it's no longer actively complaining, which counts as success. The forecastle continues its symphony of sounds, men talking, someone already snoring in a hammock, the constant creak of wood, water sloshing against the hull just feet away from where you sit. This is home now, this cramped, smelly, poorly lit cave in the bow of a ship. You'll eat here, sleep here, spend your off-watch hours here surrounded by men you don't know, some of whom will become brothers, some of whom you'll grow to despise. The forecastle is democracy in its most brutal form. Everyone equal in their misery, sharing the same terrible food and worse accommodations. Tucker elbows you. Better get some rest while you can. Watch changes at midnight and Sherman's not gentle with the wake-up call. Right. 4 hours of sleep ahead, then back on deck. You eye the hammocks with a mixture of exhaustion and dread, wondering how you're supposed to actually sleep in one of those swinging contraptions. But that's a problem for 5 minutes from now. Right now, your belly's full of salt and regret, and honestly, you've had worse dinners. Probably. Maybe. You try to remember what fresh vegetables taste like and come up empty. With a few minutes before you need to claim a hammock and pretend to understand how they work, you decide to explore your new floating home. Tucker's already wandered off to check his sea chest, and the other sailors are either heading to their bunks or lingering over the last dregs of coffee. You climb back up the ladder to the deck where the night air hits you like a blessing. Even the salt and tar smell is perfume compared to the forecastle atmosphere. The patient sprawls before you in the lamplight, 100+ feet of wood and rope and canvas that's somehow supposed to carry you across thousands of miles of ocean, while you hunt creatures the size of school buses. Standing here, you can finally appreciate just how much of this ship is dedicated to storage versus how little is reserved for the humans who actually sail it. Spoiler alert, the ratio is depressing. Let's start with what you can see. The main deck runs the length of the ship, interrupted by various structures that have names you're still learning. There's the forecastle deck up at the bow where you're standing, raised slightly above the main deck. Moving aft, that's toward the back, landsman. You've got the main deck with its forest of masts and rigging, the try-works, a brick furnace for rendering whale blubber, currently cold but you can smell the ghost of previous fires. And finally the quarterdeck at the stern where officers pace and green hands fear to tread. But the real story is below decks, where the ship transforms from a vessel into a three-dimensional puzzle of storage optimization that would make a Tetris champion weep. Below the main deck, the ship is divided into sections, each with its specific purpose, and approximately none of them are designed with human comfort in mind. Forward, you've got the forecastle where you just ate your gourmet meal. That's your space, along with most of the crew, 20-ish men in an area the size of a modest bedroom. Just after that, separated by a bulkhead, sits the blubber room, where the whale blubber gets temporarily stored before processing. Right now it's empty, but you've been warned that once you actually catch a whale, this space becomes a slippery, reeking hell of fat chunks waiting their turn at the try-works. Moving further aft, you encounter the main hold, the largest single space on the ship and the reason you're all here. This cavernous area, stretching maybe 40 feet in length and taking up most of the ship's width, currently holds those 200-odd empty barrels waiting to be filled with whale oil. It also contains provisions, barrels of flour, salt pork, hardtack, dried peas, coffee, and all the other delightful food items you'll be choking down for the next few years. There's spare rope, canvas for sail repairs, lumber for patching holes, tools, weapons, and approximately 17,000 other items necessary for a ship that won't see a proper port for months at a time. Here's your mainstream historical fact. A fully loaded whaling ship returning from a successful voyage might carry 2,000 to 3,000 barrels of whale oil and sperm oil, representing roughly 50,000 to 75,000 gallons of the stuff. That's an obscene amount of liquid cargo, all stored in wooden barrels, all sloshing around below your feet while you're trying to sleep. The ship literally gets heavier and rides lower in the water as the voyage succeeds, which affects how it handles in storms and whether it capsizes. Comforting thoughts for bedtime. Above the main hold, built into the deck, sits the steerage, cramped quarters for the skilled workers like the carpenter, cooper, and steward. These men get slightly more space than you, which means they can almost stand up fully and maybe extend both arms without hitting someone. It's luxury living by whaling ship standards, which tells you everything about whaling ship standards. Further aft still, you've got the officers' quarters and the captain's cabin. You haven't seen these spaces and probably never will, but rumour suggests the captain has an actual cabin with an actual door, maybe 10 feet by 8 feet, containing an actual bed, a desk, a chair, and possibly even a small window, called a stern window in nautical terminology. The mates share a slightly smaller space, still miles better than your hammock situation. The class divide isn't subtle on a whaling ship, it's architectural. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some whaling ships included a slop chest, a locked storage area containing clothing, tobacco and other goods that the crew could purchase on credit against their future earnings. This was theoretically a convenience for sailors who needed to replace worn-out gear mid-voyage, but in practice became another mechanism for ship owners to extract money from crew members, since the prices were inflated and added to the deductions from your already microscopic lay. Capitalism really finds a way. You make your way toward the stern, carefully avoiding the quarterdeck because you're not suicidal, and peek down through another hatch. Below the quarterdeck sits the cabin, the officer's domain, and below that the lazarette, a storage area for gear and provisions that need to be accessed regularly. Every cubic inch of this ship serves a purpose, and that purpose is almost never crew comfort. The thing that strikes you, standing here in the lamplight with the harbour water slapping the hull, is how much empty barrel space exists compared to living space. The ship is essentially a floating warehouse, with a skeleton crew attached to maintain it. You and your fellow sailors are the minimum viable product of human presence required to make the warehouse mobile and functional. If they could train dolphins to haul rope and climb rigging, they'd probably replace you in a heartbeat. Historians still argue whether the extreme discomfort of whaling ship accommodations was a deliberate strategy to toughen up crew members and discourage complaints, or simply the inevitable result of prioritising cargo capacity over human welfare in an era where labour was cheap and whales were profitable. From your perspective as a green hand who'll be sleeping in a swinging hammock, wedged between strangers, the answer feels academic. You climb back down to the forecastle, where men are settling into their hammocks with the practiced ease of people who've done this 1,000 times. Your hammock awaits, swinging gently like it's mocking you. Around you, maybe 15 cubic feet of personal space that you'll share with your sea chest, and whatever belongings you can cram into it. This is your bedroom, your office, your meditation space, your everything for the foreseeable future. The ship creaks as she settles, wood groaning against wood, ropes adjusting to tension changes. These sounds will become your lullaby, the background music of your life at sea. You're living inside a wooden box that floats, held together by tar and hope and the expertise of men who built her, and you're about to trust this box with your actual life across thousands of miles of ocean. You look around the forecastle one more time, at the swinging hammocks, the battered sea chests, the lamp casting its weak glow, the faces of men who'll be your only human contact for months. This is it. This is home, and it's somehow even smaller than you imagined. You don't get much time to contemplate your claustrophobic new home because Tucker's shaking your shoulder before you've even managed to wedge yourself into your hammock. Watch change in 10 minutes. Sherman wants all hands on deck. Right, because you just finished a 4-hour watch scrubbing the deck into submission, and now after a meal and maybe 20 minutes of sitting, it's time for more watch. This can't be right. Thought I had 8 hours off, you protest weakly. Tucker snorts. You do, normally, but we're still in harbour, getting ready to catch tomorrow's tide. All hands means all hands. We're securing for departure. Sleep comes later. Maybe. You haul yourself back up the ladder, every muscle in your lower back filing formal complaints. On deck, the night has settled in completely. The stars are out in force now, more of them than you've ever seen from land, sharp pinpricks of light untouched by the lamp glow and coal smoke of civilization. The air has cooled, carrying the smell of the sea mixing with the tar and hemp and old wood of the ship. If you weren't utterly exhausted and mildly terrified, it might even be beautiful. Mr. Sherman appears from the darkness like a nautical phantom. Right, listen up. Larboard watch, we're finishing the rigging check and securing loose gear. Green hand. He points at you, because of course he does. Your forward lookout for the first hour. See that platform up there? He gestures toward the foremast, where maybe 30 feet up a small platform juts out from the mast. That's the foretop. You'll climb up, keep your eyes on the harbour and sing out if you see anything unusual. You stare at the rigging rising into darkness above you. What counts as unusual, sir? Boats approaching. Anything floating that might foul our anchor line the second coming. Use your judgment. And Greenhand, don't fool. We haven't left port yet, and I'd rather not explain to the captain why we're already down a man. He's definitely joking. Probably joking. You really hope he's joking. The climb up the ratlines, the rope ladder attached to the shrouds, is less terrifying than you expected and more terrifying than you wanted. Each step up takes you further from the deck and closer to a long drop into dark water. Your hands grip the rough hemp with enough force to leave imprints, and you're very aware that these ropes are held in place by knots tied by people you don't know and maintained by people who might have been drunk at the time. But you climb, hand over hand, foot after foot, because falling is not an option and showing fear is worse. The platform, the foretop, is maybe 4 feet across, with a railing that comes up to your waist and inspires absolutely no confidence. You pull yourself onto it with all the grace of a seal flopping onto a rock, then stand there gripping the mast while your heart remembers how to beat at a normal pace. The ship rocks gently beneath you, and up here the movement is amplified, a slow, swaying arc that makes your stomach question its dinner choices. But the view, the view almost makes the climb worthwhile. From 30 feet up, the harbour spreads out around you like a painting. Other ships at anchor, their masts creating a forest of vertical lines against the stars, the lights of New Bedford twinkling on shore, windows in houses where people are eating proper food and sleeping in beds that don't swing, the dark water reflecting starlight in patches where the harbour scum doesn't quite cover it. You can see the whole length of the Patience below you, a wooden vessel that suddenly looks very small against the vastness of the water. Here's your mainstream fact for this section. The lookout position was crucial on whaling ships because spotting a whale before other ships in the area meant the difference between a successful hunt and watching someone else claim your profit. The first man to spot and call out a whale, "There she blows," traditionally received a small bonus, maybe a pound of tobacco or an extra tot of rum. Men would volunteer for lookout duty despite the exposure to weather and the monotony, because that bonus meant something when you were earning a 200th of nothing. You settle into your position, trying to look like you know what you're doing. The ship continues her preparations below. You can hear men moving about, ropes being coiled, the ship's bell marking time with its 8-chime pattern. Mr. Sherman's voice carries across the water occasionally, directing activities you can't quite see. The night air is cool enough that you're glad for your wool jacket, even with the day's work still making you sweat. The wind, light as it is, comes from the west, carrying land smells. Wood smoke, horses, the indefinable scent of human habitation. Tomorrow you'll sail out on the morning tide, and these land smells will fade, replaced by nothing but salt water and your own unwashed crew for months on end. It's your last night breathing air that doesn't taste exclusively of ocean. A quirky historical detail. Some whaling ships mounted a small bell at the foretop specifically for the lookout to ring when spotting whales, rather than relying on shouted alerts that might get lost in wind. The bell code was simple: 1 ring for a whale sighting starboard, 2 for port, continuous ringing for dead ahead. You glance around your platform and find no such bell, which means you'll be doing this the old-fashioned way with lung power and hope. Time passes with the peculiar slowness of watch duty. You scan the harbour, seeing nothing unusual unless you count the absolute ordinariness of everything as unusual. A few boats are moving about, late fishermen returning maybe, or someone rowing between ships. The water slaps against hulls with a rhythm that would be soothing if you weren't hyper-aware that you're supposed to be vigilant and professional. Below, you watch the crew work. From up here, their movements look choreographed. Men hauling on lines in unison, coiling rope in precise spirals, checking and rechecking knots and fittings. These are the experienced hands, the men who know their craft, and watching them makes you feel even more useless. You can't tie a proper bowline yet, can barely tell one sail from another, and definitely don't understand the complex relationship between wind, canvas, and making the ship go where you want it to. Historians still argue whether the traditional practice of putting green hands on lookout duty their first night was effective training, or just a way to get them out from underfoot while real work happened. The logic supposedly was that lookout taught you to observe carefully and understand the ship's position relative to its surroundings, but the counter-argument is that an inexperienced lookout is essentially useless and might miss something important, while experienced sailors waste time on deck when they could be resting. You're inclined to agree with the get them out from underfoot theory. The stars wheel slowly overhead. You find yourself picking out constellations. There's Orion, belt and sword clearly visible, the Big Dipper pointing toward Polaris, the North Star, which you'll come to rely on for navigation once you're actually at sea. Up here, away from the deck lamps, the Milky Way is a river of light across the sky. It's the same sky you saw from land, but somehow it feels different now, more immediate, more real. These stars will guide you across oceans, mark your position, tell you which direction holds home. Your hour passes in a mixture of wonder and boredom, the strange combination that will define so much of your time at sea. Finally, a voice calls from below, "Look out, you're relieved." You climb down carefully, your legs shaking slightly from standing still in one position, while the platform swayed. Solid deck has never felt so good beneath your feet. Mr. Sherman nods at you. "See anything worth reporting?" "No, sir. Harbour's quiet." "Good. Now make yourself useful. Those spare sails need checking for rat damage. You'll find them in the forward hold. Of course they do. Because your first watch isn't complete without crawling through dark storage spaces looking for rat-chewed canvas. You head below, where the adventure continues in ways you definitely didn't imagine when you signed those articles. The forward hold smells like every bad decision you've ever made decided to decompose together in the dark. You descend another ladder with a whale oil lamp in hand, watching the weak circle of light reveal stacks of canvas, coils of spare rope, and barrels marked with mysterious abbreviations that probably mean something important to someone who isn't you. Somewhere in this maze of maritime storage, there are supposedly spare sails that may or may not have been gnawed on by rats, and you've been tasked with finding out. You're halfway through inspecting a rolled topsail for damage when you hear footsteps on the deck above, followed by a silence so sudden it's like someone sucked the sound out of the world. The casual banter stops. The easy laughter cuts off mid-syllable. Even the usual working sounds, men hauling rope, feet scuffing on planks, go quiet. Then a voice, pitched low enough you can barely hear it. Captain's on deck. You peer up through the hatch opening and catch a glimpse of the quarterdeck. Captain Barnes has emerged from his cabin, and the effect on the crew is like watching a school of fish react to a shark's shadow. Men who are leaning casually against the rail suddenly find urgent tasks. Conversations evaporate. Everyone becomes very focused on looking busy and competent, or better yet, invisible. The captain himself is just a silhouette from your angle. Medium height, grey beard, wearing a proper coat despite the warmth. He's not doing anything dramatic. He's simply existing on his quarterdeck, possibly checking the compass or examining the sky or contemplating the mysteries of whale migration. But his mere presence transforms the entire atmosphere of the ship. This is power in its purest form, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself because everyone already knows. Here's your mainstream historical fact about whaling captains. Under Admiralty law, once a ship was more than 3 miles from shore, the captain's authority was absolute. He could impose punishments, settle disputes, perform marriages, theoretically, and make life or death decisions with no oversight except his own conscience and whatever the ship owners might say when he eventually returned to port. If the captain decided you'd committed a flogging offence, you got flogged. If he decided you'd lost your grog ration for a month, you went dry. Appeal process. That's adorable. His word was literally law, backed by the isolation of being surrounded by thousands of miles of ocean with nowhere to run. You return your attention to the sail in your hands, running your fingers along the heavy canvas and finding nothing. No holes, no obvious chew marks, no evidence that rats have been using this as a midnight snack. You carefully re-roll it and move to the next one, all while keeping your ears tuned to the sounds filtering down from above. Captain Barnes doesn't speak often, you'll learn. He doesn't need to. He has 3 mates whose job is to translate his will into action, and they've learned to anticipate what he wants through some combination of experience and survival instinct. When the captain does speak, it's usually brief, direct, and immediately obeyed. Mr. Coffin, see to the anchor watch. Mr. Sherman, check the backstays on the mainmast. Simple commands that ripple down through the hierarchy until some poor green hand, frequently you, is actually doing the work. The power structure aboard the Patience flows from the captain like water running downhill, gathering force as it goes. The captain directs the first mate. The first mate manages the other mates. The mates control the skilled seamen and harpooners. The skilled seamen boss around the ordinary seaman. And everyone, from the captain down to the cook's assistant, outranks you. You're at the bottom of a pyramid where power is measured in the ability to make other people's lives miserable, and you've got nobody below you to push around except maybe the ship's rats, who frankly seem to be doing fine despite your best efforts. Here's your quirky detail about this hierarchy. On some whaling ships, the captain rarely ate with his officers, preferring to dine alone in his cabin to maintain psychological distance. The thinking was that familiarity bred contempt, and a captain who shared jokes over dinner couldn't effectively maintain the godlike authority needed to control 30 men in the middle of the ocean with no backup. Captain Barnes, from what you've gathered, subscribes to this philosophy. He takes his meals in solitude, appears on deck for inspections and critical moments, and otherwise remains a mysterious presence behind a cabin door, like the Wizard of Oz if the wizard actually had the power to maroon you on a deserted island. You find a small tear in the third sail. Not rat damage, just wear from previous use, and make a mental note to report it to someone. Probably Mr. Sherman, who'll tell the sailmaker, who'll fix it or not depending on priorities you don't understand. This is your life now, finding small problems in dark spaces and reporting them up the chain to people who might care. Above, the captain's inspection continues. You hear his boots on the deck, measured, unhurried steps that suggest a man examining his domain. Occasionally a question, too quiet to make out the words, followed by a mate's prompt response. the ritual of command playing out in the lamplight and darkness. Historians still argue whether the extreme power imbalance on whaling ships was necessary for effective operation in dangerous conditions, or whether it was simply a holdover from naval traditions that prioritised obedience over competence. The evidence suggests both factors mattered. You genuinely need clear command structures when hunting whales or weathering storms, but the specific degree of captain as deity probably owed more to tradition and ego than operational necessity. You finish inspecting the sails, 3 with minor damage, the rest serviceable, and climb back up to report your findings. By the time you reach the deck, the captain has vanished back into his cabin like a ghost at sunrise. The atmosphere immediately relaxes. Men start talking again. Someone laughs at a joke. The ship remembers it contains humans rather than automatons awaiting orders. Mr. Sherman appears at your elbow. Well? 3 sails with small tears, sir. No rat damage that I could find. He nods, filing this information away in whatever mental catalogue he maintains. Good. Report to the cook. He needs water barrels moved from the hold. After that, you can catch some sleep before the next watch. Sleep. That mythical state you vaguely remember from your previous life on land. You head toward the galley, where the cook directs you to barrels that weigh approximately as much as a small horse, and need to be shifted maybe 6 inches to the left, for reasons that probably make sense to someone. As you wrestle with the first barrel, you think about the captain in his cabin above your head. Does he sleep better, knowing he has absolute power? Does the weight of 30 lives under his command keep him awake at night? Or has he done this so many times that it's just routine? Another voyage, another crew, another attempt to fill the hold with oil and return to port rich? You'll never know. The distance between a green hand in the hold moving water barrels and the captain in his cabin might as well be measured in light years. You exist in the same wooden universe, but you'll rarely occupy the same spaces or share the same concerns. He worries about navigation, weather, finding whales, and maintaining discipline. You worry about not screwing up your assigned tasks, getting enough sleep, and surviving long enough to maybe, possibly, eventually become an ordinary seaman who at least knows which rope does what. The barrel finally shifts with a groan of wood on wood. You wipe sweat from your forehead and start on the next one. Somewhere above, the captain sleeps or reads or plots tomorrow's course. Down here, you move barrels because someone told you to, and in this moment, that's the entire extent of your power and purpose. The hierarchy is complete, eternal, and absolute. Welcome to the bottom, Green Hand. The view doesn't improve, but you'll get used to it. You finally finish relocating the water barrels to their new home 6 inches from their old home, and Mr. Sherman dismisses you with a grunt that might be approval, or might just be acknowledgement of your existence. Either way, you're free until the next watch change, which means you have maybe 3 hours to figure out how hammocks work and achieve something resembling sleep. The forecastle has settled into its nighttime rhythm when you descend. Most of the off-watch crew are already in their hammocks, and the lamp has been turned down to save oil, casting everything in a dim amber glow that makes shadows dance across the curved walls. You approach your assigned hammock, a tube of canvas suspended between 2 hooks, with the wariness of someone approaching a wild animal that might bolt. Tucker's already cocooned in his, reading a battered book by the lamplight. Pro tip, he says without looking up. Sit in the middle, then swing your legs up. Don't try to climb in from the side unless you want to end up on the floor. You attempt to follow these instructions and promptly demonstrate why his warning was necessary by nearly flipping the entire contraption and landing in a heap. Second attempt goes better. You manage to wedge yourself into the canvas hammock, which immediately wraps around you like a burrito, and lie there trying to find a position that doesn't cut off circulation to major limbs. And that's when you hear it. The symphony. The ship. This 110-foot collection of wood, rope, canvas, and iron is alive with sound. Not the sounds of men moving about, but the sounds of the structure itself, breathing and flexing and groaning like a living creature. It starts with the creaking. Every timber in the hull seems to have its own voice, its own particular complaint as the ship rocks gently in the harbour swell. The main mast groans with a deep bass note. The deck beams overhead creak with a higher pitch. The planking along the walls produces a rhythmic squeaking as they rub against their neighbours, expanding and contracting with temperature changes and moisture. Then there are the ropes, hundreds of them, from the massive anchor cable to the smallest ratline, all under tension, all responding to the ship's movement. They produce a chorus of sounds, creaking, humming, occasionally a sharp twang when one adjusts suddenly to a shift in weight or wind direction. It's like being inside a giant wooden instrument that's constantly tuning itself and never quite achieving harmony. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Wooden ships were deliberately built with some flexibility. The planks weren't meant to be rigidly locked together, but rather to move slightly relative to each other, allowing the hull to flex with the waves rather than breaking under stress. This meant constant creaking and groaning was actually a sign of a healthy ship. A silent ship was either brand new or actively falling apart. So congratulations. The disturbing orchestra keeping you awake is evidence that the Patience is functioning exactly as designed. The water adds its own voice to the composition. You can hear it slapping against the hull just a few feet from where you're suspended, a liquid percussion that varies with the waves. Sometimes it's a gentle lapping sound, almost soothing. Other times it hits with a hollow thump that makes you acutely aware of just how thin the wooden walls are between you and the deep. There's also a subtle sloshing from the bilge water deep in the hold, the inevitable leakage that accumulates and needs to be pumped out regularly. That's a sound you'll come to know well, the soundtrack of a ship that's technically watertight but not actually watertight. Something scurries in the darkness beyond the lamplight. Rats, undoubtedly, because of course the ship has rats. They have their own sounds, the scratch of claws on wood, the occasional squeak of rodent conversation, the rustle of them investigating food stores or nesting in canvas. You're sharing this ship with dozens of uninvited passengers who probably have a better understanding of the vessel's layout than you do. The wind contributes its part, whistling through the rigging above, moaning around the masts, catching in the furled sails and making them flutter like distant applause. Even in the harbour, with minimal breeze, the wind finds ways to make itself heard, whispering through gaps and cracks, creating draughts that make the lamp flame dance. Here's your quirky tidbit. Sailors developed an entire vocabulary for ship sounds, naming specific creaks and groans the way you might name different bird calls. A devil's fiddle was the particular screech of rigging under extreme stress. A singing mast meant the wind was catching it just right. Barking was the sound of the anchor cable rubbing against the hawse hole. Some old sailors claimed they could diagnose problems with the ship just by listening, identifying which timber was stressed or which rope was fraying based purely on the sounds it made. You're currently at the level of, what's that noise and should I be worried about it? But give it time. You close your eyes and try to filter out the symphony, but that just makes you more aware of each individual component. There's the creaking. Definitely the creaking is loudest. The water slapping is second. The wind whistling is third. The rat scurrying is fourth and most disturbing. Somewhere overhead, footsteps cross the deck as the anchor watch makes their rounds. The ship's bell rings, one chime marking the half hour of the watch. Tucker's voice drifts from the darkness. Gets quieter once you're used to it. When does that happen, you ask? About 6 months in, maybe a year. Some men never adjust and spend the whole voyage wondering what that noise was. Fantastic. You've signed up for years of sleepless nights in a hammock, surrounded by an orchestra of ominous sounds, while rats critique your life choices from the shadows. The hammock sways gently with the ship's movement, and you have to admit once you stop fighting it, there's something almost soothing about the rocking motion. It's like being in a very uncomfortable cradle, if cradles were made of canvas and suspended in rat-infested wooden caves that smelled like unwashed sailors and old fish. You're selling this experience really well to yourself. Historians still argue whether the constant noise of wooden ships contributed to the psychological strain on sailors, or whether humans are adaptable enough that the sounds simply became background within weeks. Some journals from the era mention the ship's voice, almost affectionately, suggesting sailors formed bonds with the sounds of their vessel. Other accounts describe men driven to distraction by the relentless creaking and groaning. You suspect it depends on the individual and how desperate they are to sleep. A particularly loud creak makes you jump, nearly flipping yourself out of the hammock again. Tucker chuckles. That's just the main mast settling. You'll learn which sounds mean trouble and which are just the ship complaining. Right now, everything sounds like trouble to you. He's not wrong. Every creak sounds like the ship is about to split in half. Every splash of water sounds like you're sinking. Every scurry of rats sounds like they're about to organize a coup and take over the vessel. You're basically existing in a state of low-level panic disguised as attempted sleep. But slowly, imperceptibly, your exhaustion wins. The sounds start to blur together into a single ambient wash of noise. The hammock swaying becomes less alarming and more like being rocked by an indifferent but not hostile force. Your breathing slows, your muscles unclench slightly. The symphony continues, the ship groaning, the water slapping, the rats scurrying, the wind whistling, but it fades into background texture rather than demanding your immediate attention. Your last conscious thought is that you're sleeping inside a wooden organism that's alive with movement and sound, held together by human craftsmanship and hope, about to carry you across thousands of miles of ocean. And somehow, impossibly, you're actually drifting off. The symphony plays on without an audience as you finally mercifully sleep. Someone's shaking your hammock, and for a confused moment you think you're still on land experiencing an earthquake. Then reality crashes back. You're on a ship, in a hammock, and the voice growling, "Green hand topside now belongs to Mr. Sherman, who seems to have a supernatural ability to locate you in the dark." You extract yourself from the canvas cocoon with only moderate humiliation, pull on your boots, and follow him up the ladder. On deck, the night has reached that deep darkness between moonset and dawn, when the stars are at their brightest, and the world consists entirely of black water and blacker sky punctuated by pinpricks of light. The second mate, Mr. Whitfield, stands near the mainmast with what looks like a brass instrument in his hands, and an expression suggesting he's about to perform surgery on the universe. "Hold this." He thrusts a whale oil lamp at you. "Keep it steady and pointed at the horizon. Don't move, don't talk, and for the love of God, don't drop it." You take the lamp, which is heavier than expected, and radiates heat that's welcome in the cool night air. Mr. Whitfield positions himself carefully, raising the brass instrument, a sextant you'll learn, to his eye, and sighting through it toward the eastern horizon. You stand there trying to be a statue, the lamp extended at arm's length, feeling like the world's least qualified lighthouse. The sextant is a beautiful piece of precision engineering, all brass and mirrors and calibrated scales, designed to measure the angle between celestial objects and the horizon. Mr. Whitfield is using it to take a star sight. Specifically, he's measuring the angle of several stars above the horizon to determine the ship's latitude. In an era before GPS, before radio, before anything except human skill and mathematical tables, this is how you figure out where you are on a featureless ocean. Here's your mainstream fact. Celestial navigation using sextants and chronometers was accurate to within a few miles under good conditions, which sounds impressive until you realize a few miles of error could mean the difference between finding a specific whaling ground and sailing right past it into empty ocean. Navigation was part science, part art, and part gambling with everyone's lives on whether you'd correctly calculated your position. "Mark," Mr. Whitfield mutters, checking the angle shown on the sextant scale. He pulls out a small notebook and scribbles numbers by the dim light of your lamp. Then he's sighting again, this time on a different star, repeating the process. You stand there holding the lamp, trying not to think about how much your arm is starting to ache, or how desperately you want to ask what he's actually doing. Navigation aboard a whaling ship is a constant obsession because, unlike merchant vessels that run predictable routes between established ports, whalers chase their prey across thousands of miles of open ocean. You need to know where the good whaling grounds are, the Pacific off Japan, the Brazil banks, the waters around the Azores, and you need to know how to get there, how to stay there while hunting, and how to get home again. Get it wrong, and you're sailing in circles burning through supplies while the crew gets increasingly mutinous and the ship owners get increasingly bankrupt. Mr. Whitfield takes 3 more sights, each time having you adjust the lamp's position slightly to illuminate different sections of the horizon. Between measurements, he checks a brass chronometer, an expensive, precious timepiece that keeps accurate time regardless of temperature changes or the ship's motion. The chronometer shows Greenwich Mean Time, and by comparing it to the local time calculated from the stars' positions, he can determine the ship's longitude. It's elegant mathematics translated into survival. "You know what I'm doing?" he asks suddenly, not looking away from his notebook where he's performing calculations. "Taking our position, sir," you venture. "Close enough. We're still in port, so I know exactly where we are. This is practice, keeping my hand in before we're actually depending on these numbers to find land after months at sea. You ever think about how navigation works?" You admit you haven't given it much thought beyond stars good, getting lost bad. He almost smiles. "Dead reckoning? That's what we do most of the time. You track your course and speed, estimate current and wind drift, and calculate where you should be based on where you were. But dead reckoning accumulates errors. Every small mistake in speed or direction adds up until you're significantly off course. So we take celestial sights whenever we can, stars at night, sun at noon, to correct our position and reset the clock on those accumulated errors. Here's your quirky tidbit. The term dead reckoning probably comes from deduced reckoning, with dead being a corruption of dead as a shorthand for deduced. Or it might come from the fact that you're navigating based on your previous position, which is dead in the sense of being past and fixed. Historians still argue about the etymology, but regardless, the name is appropriately ominous for a navigation method that's essentially educated guessing with mathematical pretensions. Mr. Whitfield finishes his calculations and marks something on the chart he's brought up from below. See this? He shows you the chart by lamplight. It's a detailed map of the coast, covered in depth markings, hazard notations and lines indicating safe channels. Tomorrow we sail. I need to know our exact position in the harbour so I can calculate the course that gets us out to open water without hitting rocks, sandbanks, or other ships. 1 degree of error and we rip the bottom out of the hull before we're even properly underway. The responsibility of it hits you suddenly. This man, with his sextant and chronometer and mathematical tables, holds 30 lives in his calculations. 1 misread angle, 1 arithmetic error, 1 mistake translating between the star's positions and the ship's location, and everyone aboard could die. And he's just the second mate. The third mate also navigates, and the captain makes the final decisions. They're all performing this elaborate ritual of measurement and calculation, checking each other's work because the ocean doesn't care about your confidence, only your accuracy. "Why am I holding the lamp, sir?" you finally ask. "Because the horizon is easier to see when it's slightly illuminated," he explains, packing away his sextant in its wooden case with the care you'd give a newborn baby. Also, standing still holding a lamp for 20 minutes teaches patience and attention to detail, both of which you'll need in abundance if you want to survive this voyage. Historians still argue whether the extreme precision demanded by celestial navigation was actually achievable under the conditions aboard working ships: rolling decks, salt spray on the mirrors, exhausted navigators making calculations by lamplight, or whether experienced captains developed intuitive skills that mattered more than mathematical accuracy. The answer is probably both, with a heavy dose of luck thrown in. Mr. Whitfield dismisses you with a nod, and you return the lamp to its hook. Above, the stars continue their slow wheel across the sky, indifferent to human attempts to measure and categorize them. The same stars that guided ancient Phoenicians, medieval Arab traders, and Polynesian navigators across oceans are now guiding the Patience and her crew toward whales and profit and possibly disaster. You head back to your hammock, thinking about angles and arithmetic and the thin line between knowing where you are and being completely, terrifyingly lost. You descend back into the forecastle and are immediately swallowed by darkness so thick it feels physical, like you're wading through black water. The lamp you return to its hook provides barely enough light to see your own hands, let alone navigate the obstacle course of hammocks, sea chests, and sleeping sailors that fills the space. Your eyes, still adjusted to the starlight above, are completely useless down here. You stand at the bottom of the ladder waiting for your vision to adapt, and slowly, very slowly, the darkness resolves into slightly different shades of black. Welcome to below-deck life, where seeing is a generous description of what your eyes manage to accomplish. The whale oil lamp produces a flame about as bright as a birthday candle, and it's expected to illuminate a space packed with 20 men and all their belongings. The light doesn't so much illuminate as suggest. You get hints of shapes, vague outlines of objects, the occasional glint of something reflective catching the flame. Everything beyond about 6 feet from the lamp exists in a murky twilight that could hide anything from sea chests to sleeping crewmates to, theoretically, a small whale if it was particularly quiet. You shuffle toward your hammock, hands outstretched like a blind man, trying to avoid tripping over the various obstacles that seem to have reproduced since you left. Your shin connects with someone's sea chest. Not hard enough to really hurt, but enough to make you bite back a curse. From a nearby hammock, a voice mutters, "Watch it, Greenhand," which is helpful advice but fails to specify what exactly you're supposed to watch when you can't see anything. Here's your mainstream historical fact about shipboard lighting. Whale oil lamps were the primary light source aboard whaling ships, which creates a delicious irony. You're hunting whales partly so people can have better lighting, while you yourself exist in near darkness, using the absolute minimum amount of whale oil necessary to technically call it light. The ship's owners weren't about to waste valuable cargo on crew comfort, so lamps were turned down low or extinguished entirely whenever possible. Darkness was free. Light cost money. The economic logic was flawless and the lived experience was miserable. The air down here tastes like it's been breathed too many times. There's no ventilation to speak of, just whatever air manages to drift down through the hatch, mixing with the stale exhalations of sleeping men, the damp must of unwashed wool, and the indefinable funk of too many bodies in too small a space. You can actually taste it on your tongue. This recycled air that's part human respiration, part mildew, part whatever, died in the bilge and was never quite removed. Taking a deep breath feels less like refreshing your lungs and more like coating them with a film of organic decay. Your hammock is still where you left it, which is a small miracle given how disoriented you are in the darkness. You manage to wedge yourself back into it without waking the neighbouring sleepers, another small miracle, and lie there adjusting to the sensory deprivation chamber that is the forecastle at night. Above deck, even in darkness, there's space and air and the vastness of sky. Down here, the ceiling presses down maybe 6 feet above the floor, the walls curve in close, and you're surrounded by warm bodies producing heat and moisture and carbon dioxide. The darkness has texture. It's not uniform but layered. Denser near the corners where the lamp's feeble light never reaches, slightly less oppressive in the centre, where the flame creates a weak sphere of almost visibility. You can feel the darkness pressing against your eyes, this absence of light that becomes its own presence. It's the kind of darkness that makes you understand why humans invented fire and worship the sun and build our entire civilizations around the ability to push back the night. Here's your quirky detail. Some whaling ships had a tradition of preserving the darkness, where crew members moving through below-deck spaces at night were expected to memorize the layout so well they could navigate purely by touch, without relying on what little light existed. The thinking was twofold. It saved lamp oil, and it trained sailors to function during night emergencies when lighting might be unavailable or dangerous. You're currently at the stage of running into everything and apologizing to inanimate objects, but theoretically in a few months, you'll know every inch of this space by feel alone. The psychological weight of the darkness is something you weren't prepared for. It's one thing to experience night on land, where you can see the moon, stars, distant lights from buildings. It's another thing entirely to be surrounded by wooden walls in a space barely larger than a closet, with darkness so complete that closing your eyes makes no difference to what you see. It creates a kind of sensory isolation that makes your mind turn inward, amplifying every thought and worry because there's literally nothing else to focus on. You can hear everything with painful clarity though. The breathing of sleeping sailors forms a symphony of different rhythms, some slow and deep, others rapid and shallow, at least 3 distinct snorers producing competing melodies. Someone mutters in their sleep, words you can't quite make out, but that sound vaguely distressed. The ship continues its creaking conversation with the water. A rat scurries somewhere close enough to make you flinch. In darkness, this complete sound becomes your primary sense, painting pictures that may or may not match reality. Historians still argue whether the extreme darkness of below-deck spaces contributed to the high rates of depression and psychological breakdown among sailors, or whether humans adapted quickly enough that it became simply another hardship in a profession full of hardships. Some maritime journals describe the darkness almost casually, as if it were no more notable than the colour of the deck planks. Others mention it with an edge of dread, describing how men would volunteer for night watch just to escape the suffocating blackness below. The lamp flame flickers, and your heart jumps because the thought of that tiny light going out is genuinely terrifying. You'd be in absolute darkness then, unable to see your hand in front of your face, completely dependent on memory and touch to navigate. The flame steadies again, and you feel a relief out of proportion to the actual danger. It's just a lamp. But it's also the only thing standing between you and total sensory deprivation. You close your eyes, pointless in darkness this thick, but somehow it helps psychologically, and try to settle into sleep. The hammock sways gently. The ship breathes around you. The darkness presses close like a physical presence, patient and eternal, waiting for the lamp to burn down or blow out or simply run out of oil. You're living in a wooden cave at the bottom of the sea, or that's what it feels like, surrounded by nothing but blackness and the sounds of men trying to rest before the next watch demands their bodies again. This is your home now. This darkness, this closeness, this recycled air and cramped space, and the constant awareness of walls pressing in from all sides. You'll spend hours here every day, sleeping, resting, eating, existing in the perpetual twilight that passes for interior illumination on a ship that values cargo space over crew comfort. Somewhere above, stars are shining. The moon is rising or setting or doing whatever moons do. Fresh air is moving across the ocean, carrying the smells of salt and freedom. But down here, in the forecastle, in the darkness, you exist in a separate world. One measured in inches rather than miles, lit by fire so weak it barely deserves the name, filled with air that tastes like it's already been used up. You drift towards sleep, and the darkness comes with you, following you down into dreams that are no blacker than the waking world you're leaving behind. Sleep doesn't last long because it never does. You're shaken awake what feels like minutes later, but is apparently 3 hours, stumble through another watch rotation that involves swabbing a deck that was already clean, and finally, you're granted a stretch of genuine off-watch time during daylight hours. The sun is up, the ship is still at anchor, and for the first time since boarding, you're not actively required to be doing back-breaking labour. This counts as luxury in the whaling ship economy. You find a spot on the main deck where you're out of the way of actual work, lean against a barrel and watch the other sailors engage in what passes for recreation aboard the Patience. A cluster of men have gathered near the foremast, and they're doing something with small pieces of what looks like ivory, scraping and etching with concentrated focus that seems wildly disproportionate to the task. You drift closer, curious. Tucker waves you over. Ever seen Scrimshaw work? He holds up a whale's tooth maybe 6 inches long, yellowed with age, its surface covered in an intricate etching of a sailing ship being attacked by a massive whale. The detail is extraordinary. You can see individual waves, the rigging on the ship, even the expression of terror on the tiny sailors' faces. 3 months of work on this one, started it last voyage, finally finishing the shading. Scrimshaw, the art of carving and etching on whale bones and teeth, is what sailors do when they've got time to kill and literally nothing else to do. And on a whaling voyage, they've got a lot of time to kill. Months can pass between whale sightings, and during those empty stretches, men need something to occupy their hands and minds, or they'll go mad from boredom. So they take the bones and teeth from the creatures they've killed and transform them into art, using the crudest tools imaginable to create work that would make professional engravers weep with jealousy. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Scrimshaw became one of the only legitimate art forms created exclusively by working-class labourers in 19th century America. While most art was produced by trained professionals for wealthy patrons, Scrimshaw was made by sailors for themselves, their sweethearts, or as trade goods. The pieces that survive in museums represent a democratic art tradition. No formal training required, just patience, sharp knives, and too much free time. Some specimens are crude and rough, others are masterpieces that rival professional ivory carving. All of them are artifacts of men trying to create beauty in an occupation defined by blood and blubber. Tucker's using what looks like a sailmaker's needle to etch fine lines into the tooth's surface, following a design he's apparently holding entirely in his head. The trick is letting the natural curve of the tooth guide your composition, he explains. You don't fight the material, you work with it. See how the ship follows the tooth's arch? That's not accident, that's planning. Another sailor, older and missing part of his ear in a way you're definitely not going to ask about, holds up a piece of jawbone he's carved into a clothespin. Functional art, decorative but practical. Made about 24 of these last voyage, he says. Sold them in port for $1 each. That's real money, not like the lay we're supposedly earning. The bitter edge in his voice suggests he's done the math on his 175th share and found it wanting. The process is hypnotic to watch. The sailor takes a sharp knife and scrapes away at the bone, creating shallow grooves that form patterns, geometric designs, images of ships, portraits of women who may or may not actually exist. whales in various states of being hunted. Once the design is etched, they rub ink or soot into the grooves, wipe away the excess, and the image appears like magic against the ivory background. It's primitive and sophisticated at the same time, the kind of craft that develops when you've got whale teeth lying around and absolutely nothing else to do for weeks on end. Here's your quirky detail. Some sailors develop superstitions around scrimshaw work, believing that depicting a whale attack on their artwork would bring bad luck, while others deliberately carve disaster scenes as a form of magical protection. The logic being that if you've already shown the worst outcome, it can't happen to you. Historians still argue whether these superstitions were widely held or just individual quirks that got reported in journals and became exaggerated over time, but either way you'll notice that Tucker's whale is attacking someone else's ship, not the one he's actually sailing on. Want to try? Tucker offers, holding out a smaller tooth, maybe from a sperm whale calf only 3 inches long. Nothing fancy, just practice. See if you've got the patience for it. You take the tooth, surprised by its weight and smoothness. Tucker hands you a knife, shows you how to hold it nearly flat against the surface to avoid digging too deep, and lets you make your first experimental scratch. It's harder than it looks. The tooth is dense, resistant to the blade, and getting a clean line requires more pressure than you expected while still maintaining control. Your first attempt looks like a drunk spider walked across the tooth. Your second is marginally better. That's about right for a first try, Tucker says charitably. Keep at it. By the time we're 6 months out, you'll either be decent at this or you'll have stabbed yourself so many times you'll give up entirely. Either way, it passes the time. Around you, the scrimshaw work continues in companionable near silence, broken occasionally by comments about technique or requests to borrow a better knife. It's meditative, this slow transformation of death into art, taking the physical remains of the creatures you've killed and making them into something beautiful or useful, or at least different from what they were. Then the stories start. Because sailors with idle hands need something to do with their mouths too, and storytelling is the other primary entertainment aboard ship. The older sailor with the missing ear launches into a tale about his previous voyage, where they encountered a whale so large it made their ship look like a rowboat. 90 feet if it was an inch, he swears, and smart, too smart. It was playing with us, leading us round in circles while the other whales escaped. Finally rammed our boat, stove in 3 planks, and we barely made it back to the ship alive. You suspect this story has grown in the telling, possibly by a factor of 2 or 3. 90 feet would make it one of the largest whales ever recorded, and whales generally don't play with whaling boats so much as desperately try to escape being murdered. But nobody calls him on it because everyone understands that sea stories are about entertainment, not accuracy. Another sailor counters with a tale about a captain he sailed under who was so obsessed with catching one specific white whale that he chased it for 3 years, eventually losing the ship, most of the crew, and his own life in the pursuit. True story, he insists. Happened in the Pacific, maybe 40 or 41. Whale was white as snow and mean as the devil. You're pretty sure you've heard a version of this story before or maybe read something similar, but the details are fuzzy. Regardless, it's a good yarn. Obsessed captain, supernatural whale, tragic ending. The sailor tells it with the practiced rhythm of someone who's refined the narrative over multiple retellings, knowing exactly when to pause for effect and when to rush through the boring parts. The stories continue, each one more improbable than the last. Storms that lasted 40 days, islands that appeared on no charts, mermaids, sea serpents, ghost ships crewed by the dead. You're never quite sure where the line is between exaggerated truth and complete fabrication, and you're starting to suspect the sailors themselves don't know anymore either. The stories have been told so many times, embellished by so many different voices, that the original facts, if there ever were any, have been worn smooth like sea glass, leaving only the polished shape of a good tale. You keep working on your tooth, scraping away with more confidence now, creating something that might eventually look like. Actually, you have no idea what it looks like. A very abstract ship, a geometric pattern, a cry for help rendered in scratches. Time will tell. Above, the sun continues its arc across the sky. The ship rocks gently at anchor. Men carve beauty from bones and spin lies from truth, and for a few hours the hardships of whaling life fade into background noise. This is the other side of the voyage, not the danger and discomfort, but the quiet moments of creation and camaraderie, men making art and telling stories because it's better than dwelling on where they are and what they're about to face. You're making your 5th or 6th attempt at carving something recognisable into the whale tooth when the temperature drops. It's subtle at first, just a coolness that cuts through the afternoon warmth, but within minutes the change is unmistakable. The sun dims behind a sheet of grey cloud that's rolled in from the west like a curtain drawing across the sky. The wind, which had been a gentle harbour breeze, picks up and starts gusting in irregular bursts that make the rigging overhead snap and hum. Tucker looks up from his scrimshaw work, studying the sky with the focused attention of someone reading a language you don't yet understand. "Squall coming," he announces, and starts packing away his tools with practiced speed. Around you, the other sailors follow suit, securing their work and heading toward their sea chests, to stow their precious scrimshaw pieces. The atmosphere shifts from lazy afternoon recreation to something more purposeful in the space of about 30 seconds. Mr. Coffin's voice booms across the deck before you've even processed what's happening. "All hands, secure the ship. Look lively, gentlemen. We've got weather coming, and I don't fancy spending the night pumping bilge water because you were too slow getting the hatches battened." You scramble to your feet, looking around frantically for someone to tell you what to do. The experienced sailors are already moving with choreographed efficiency, some heading for the hatches to seal them against incoming water, others racing toward loose gear that needs securing, still others climbing into the rigging to make sure the furled sails are properly lashed. You, meanwhile, are standing in the middle of the deck like a very confused obstacle. "Green hand," Mr. Sherman appears at your elbow like a conjured demon. "See those topsails?" He points upward to where canvas is bundled against the yards, maybe 40 feet above the deck. "Get up there and help secure them. Follow Morrison, do exactly what he does, and for God's sake, hold on." You look up at the rigging, a web of rope rising into the increasingly dark sky, and your stomach attempts to file a formal protest. The ratlines that seemed merely intimidating during your previous climb in calm weather now look actively murderous. The wind is already making them sway, and the first drops of rain are starting to fall, fat and cold, splattering against the deck like liquid warnings. Here's your mainstream historical fact about storms and whaling ships. Squalls were actually more dangerous in port than at sea in some ways, because anchored ships couldn't maneuver to reduce stress on the rigging, and couldn't ride with the waves. A ship at anchor in a harbour during a sudden squall had to simply endure whatever the weather threw at it, hoping the anchor held and the rigging didn't tear loose. Captains lived in fear of being caught at anchor during serious weather, which could result in dragging across the harbour and colliding with other ships, or worse, being driven onto shore. Morrison, a compact sailor with arms like rope cables and a perpetual expression of mild irritation, is already halfway up the shrouds. You grab the ratlines and start climbing, trying to remember everything you learned during your brief previous experience. Right hand up, left hand up, right foot up. Don't look down. Definitely don't think about what happens if you fall. The wet rope is already slippery under your palms, and the wind is gusting hard enough to press you against the rigging one moment and try to peel you off the next. The rain intensifies as you climb, transforming from scattered drops into a steady downpour that soaks through your clothes in seconds. Your hands are wet, the rope is wet, your boots are wet and slipping slightly on each step. The ship rocks beneath you, and up here, every movement is amplified. What feels like a gentle sway on deck becomes a stomach-dropping arc when you're 40 feet up, with nothing but air between you and a very hard impact. You reach the yard, a horizontal wooden spar supporting the furled topsail, and Morrison is already working, lashing down loose canvas with quick, efficient movements. "Grab that corner," he shouts over the wind. "Pass me the line when I signal." You edge out onto the foot rope, a rope running beneath the yard that you're supposed to stand on while you work. This is the single most terrifying thing you've done in your entire life, and that includes climbing up here in the first place. You're standing on a wet rope, 40 feet above a rocking deck in a rainstorm, leaning over a wooden spar to grab flapping canvas that really doesn't want to be grabbed. The wind tears at the sail, trying to rip it from your grip. Rain streams down your face, making it hard to see. Your fingers are already cramping from gripping so hard. Here's your quirky detail. Sailors called working on the yards, riding the stick, and there was an entire vocabulary of insults for men who were too slow or clumsy at it. A sailor who couldn't work confidently on the foot ropes was a yard ape, or a lubber, landlubber shortened. The truly skilled sailors could actually run along the foot ropes, using just one hand on the yard for balance while they worked with the other. You are currently clinging to the yard with both arms while your feet desperately search for purchase on the wet rope below, which definitely qualifies you for lubber status. Morrison works with calm efficiency that would be impressive if you weren't so terrified you might throw up. He gathers the loose canvas, passes a line around it, creates some kind of knot that definitely has a name you don't know, and pulls it tight. "Your turn," he shouts. "Same thing on that side." You attempt to replicate his movements and produce something that looks like a drunk spider tried to tie up a sail while having a seizure. The canvas immediately starts working loose. Morrison sighs audibly even over the wind, edges over to your position with the confidence of someone who's done this 1,000 times, and redos your work in about 10 seconds. "Watch and learn, Greenhand. Like this, see? Under, around, through the loop, pull tight. It's not complicated." Everything is complicated when you're 40 feet up in a storm with wet rope and numb fingers and a very real possibility of falling to your death. But you nod and try to commit his movements to memory for next time, assuming there is a next time, and you don't die right now. Historians still argue whether the traditional practice of sending green hands up the rigging during storms was effective training, or simply hazing that occasionally resulted in deaths. The argument for it being training is that men needed to learn to work aloft in all conditions, and the only way to learn was by doing. The argument against is that inexperienced sailors were more likely to make fatal mistakes during storms, and their incompetence could endanger others who had to rescue them or complete work they bungled. You're currently providing evidence for the "this might be a terrible idea" side of the debate. The squall is in full force now, and the harbour has transformed from peaceful anchorage to churning chaos. Rain falls in sheets, driven by wind that howls through the rigging like something alive and angry. Other ships are visible as dim shapes through the downpour, all of them experiencing the same urgent scramble to secure gear and batten down. Lightning flashes somewhere to the west, followed by thunder that you feel in your chest as much as here. You finish securing your section of the sail, with Morrison's help, and begin the terrifying descent back to deck. Going down is somehow worse than going up because you can see exactly how far you have to fall. The deck below looks very small and very hard, and the distance between you and it feels impossibly vast. You climb down one careful step at a time, testing each foothold before trusting it with your weight, while rain streams down your face and the ship rocks beneath you, and somewhere in your mind a small voice is screaming continuously. Your boots hit the deck, and you've never been so grateful for solid wood beneath your feet. You're soaked through, shaking slightly from adrenaline and cold, and probably never want to climb anything ever again. Mr. Sherman appears through the rain. "Good work, Greenhand. Now get below and change into dry clothes before you catch your death. We sail tomorrow, and I need you alive for at least the first week." You stumble toward the forecastle hatch, legs wobbling, hands still cramped from gripping wet rope. Behind you, the squall continues its assault on the harbour, rain hammering the deck, wind screaming through the rigging you just escaped. You've survived your first real test of working aloft in bad weather, and the only price was absolute terror and the loss of any remaining romantic notions about life at sea. Below deck, in the relative safety and darkness of the forecastle, you peel off your soaked clothes and try to remember what dry feels like. Tucker's already there, equally drenched, wringing out his shirt. "Welcome to whaling," he says with a grin. "Wait until we do that in the actual ocean during a proper storm. This was just a warm-up." Your teeth are chattering too hard to respond, but you manage a weak smile that probably looks more like a grimace. Outside, the squall rages on, reminding you that the weather doesn't care about your comfort, your fear, or your survival. It just is, and you're going to have to learn to work in it or die trying. The squall passes as suddenly as it arrived, leaving the harbour scrubbed clean and the air tasting like ozone and salt. Your dry clothes, well, drier clothes, since nothing on a ship is ever truly dry, are barely on your body before you're called for the middle watch. That's midnight to 4 in the morning, the graveyard shift, the loneliest stretch of the 24-hour cycle. You climb back on deck to find the world transformed into something alien and beautiful and deeply unsettling. The clouds have cleared, revealing stars in such profusion that the sky looks less like darkness with points of light and more like light with patches of dark between. The Milky Way stretches overhead like someone spilled milk across the heavens, and you can actually see why ancient people thought it was literally a river of stars. The moon hasn't risen yet, which means the starlight is bright enough to cast shadows, faint, ghostly shadows, but shadows nonetheless. The harbour water, so choppy during the squall, has calmed to a gentle swell that reflects the stars like a broken mirror, fragmenting and reassembling the constellations with each wave. You're stationed at the bow, standing the anchor watch. Your job is to make sure the anchor isn't dragging, and to watch for any hazards approaching the ship. In a harbour full of anchored vessels, this mostly means staring into the darkness and trying to stay awake while your body screams that it's the middle of the night and you should be unconscious. The other members of your watch are scattered around the ship, each at their own posts too far away for conversation. You're alone with the night, the stars, and your thoughts. Here's your mainstream historical fact about the middle watch. It was universally acknowledged as the hardest watch to stand because it violated every natural human sleep pattern. Your body's circadian rhythm has you at peak sleepiness between midnight and 4 a.m. Your temperature is at its lowest, your reaction time is slowest, and your ability to make good decisions is compromised. Ship's logs from the era are full of incidents that occurred during the middle watch. Sailors falling asleep at their posts, navigation errors, accidents from impaired judgment. Yet the watch had to be stood, ships had to be monitored, and men had to fight their biology to stay awake and functional. The silence is what gets you first. Not absolute silence. The ship still creaks, the water still laps, the wind still whispers through the rigging, but human silence. No voices, no laughter, no cursing, no shouted orders. Just you and the ambient sounds of a ship at rest. It creates a kind of auditory space where your own thoughts become very loud, echoing around in your skull with nowhere else to go. You think about home, which is probably a mistake. Your family sleeping in their beds, warm and comfortable and not standing on a wet deck in the middle of the night wondering if they've made a catastrophic life. Error. You think about the girl you maybe had feelings for who definitely didn't have feelings back but who you convinced yourself to leave behind for adventure and profit. How's that working out? You're wet, cold, exhausted and earning 1/200th of theoretical future profits while standing watch over an anchored ship in a harbour. Living the dream. The stars provide no comfort, which is surprising because they should. They're beautiful, objectively, but their beauty is cold and distant and completely indifferent to your existence. You could fall overboard right now and drown, and those stars would keep shining with the exact same brilliance for the next 10,000 years. There's something profoundly isolating about looking up at the cosmos and realizing that it doesn't care about you even a little bit. Here's your quirky tidbit about maritime existential crises. Some ship's journals from the whaling era contain surprisingly philosophical entries written during middle watches, where captains and mates would record thoughts about mortality, meaning, and humanity's place in the universe. These entries often get ignored in favour of the practical navigation notes and whale sighting records, but they reveal men wrestling with the same questions that have bothered humans forever, just with the added weight of being completely alone in the middle of an ocean, surrounded by creatures large enough to crush their ships. Historians still argue whether the maritime profession attracted philosophical types, or whether extended isolation simply forced men to confront big questions they'd normally avoid by staying busy. A sound reaches you from across the water, someone on another ship singing. The voice is faint, almost drowned by the distance and the ambient harbour noise, but you can make out the melody even if the words are lost. It's a whaling ballad, probably, or maybe just a song about missing someone on land. The melody is mournful, the kind of tune that sounds like loneliness transformed into music. You don't know the singer, will never meet them, but for a moment you feel connected to this other soul who's also standing watch in the middle of the night, also using song to push back against the silence and isolation. You check the anchor line again, still taut, still holding position, still doing exactly what it's supposed to do, which is more than can be said for your attention span. The watch has only been going for an hour and you've got 3 more to survive before you're relieved. Time moves differently during the middle watch. Each minute stretches like taffy, becoming thick and slow, while simultaneously the hours blur together into one continuous experience of cold, dark, boredom punctuated by moments of existential dread. Your mind starts playing tricks after a while. That shadow on the water, is it just a wave pattern, or is it something floating that might foul the anchor line? You stare at it until your eyes hurt, trying to determine if It's moving, or if you're just seeing movement because your brain desperately needs something to focus on. Eventually you decide it's nothing. Probably, maybe, hopefully. This is your life now, staring at potentially nothing while trying to determine if it might be something important enough to report. The cold seeps in gradually. You weren't cold at first, but an hour of standing relatively still in damp clothes on a wet deck with a breeze blowing has lowered your core temperature to the point where you're shivering. Your fingers are numb. Your toes might be frostbitten for all you can feel them. You stomp your feet and swing your arms, trying to generate warmth through movement. But it's a losing battle against the night air in your wet clothes. A splash nearby makes you jump, probably a fish, or maybe a seal, or possibly a sea monster. Who knows? The darkness makes every sound potentially ominous. Your imagination, freed from the constraints of daylight rationality, starts suggesting increasingly unlikely explanations for perfectly normal maritime sounds. That creaking? Probably just the ship settling. Or possibly a ghost. The gentle splash of waves? Definitely just waves. Unless it's a kraken. Your sleep-deprived brain isn't picky about the quality of its suggestions. You think about the voyage ahead. Tomorrow. Today, technically, since it's past midnight. You sail. Out through the harbour, into the ocean proper, and then somewhere. The captain hasn't announced the specific hunting grounds yet, but rumour suggests the Azores first, then possibly down to the Brazil banks. Months of sailing to reach the whaling grounds, then months of hunting, then the long voyage home. Years of your life compressed into this decision you made in a moment of what you're increasingly certain was temporary insanity. The profound realization hits you around hour 2. You're insignificant. Not in a depressing way. Well, okay, it's a little depressing, but in a cosmic sense that's almost liberating. You're one person on one ship in one harbour on one planet, orbiting one star among billions in a galaxy that's one among billions. Your concerns about whether you're doing a good job holystoning the deck, or whether the other sailors respect you, or whether you'll survive this voyage are so microscopically small in the scale of the universe that they might as well not exist. And yet, paradoxically, those concerns are the only things that matter to you because you're a human and you exist at human scale, not cosmic scale. The stars don't care if you live or die, but you care quite a lot. Your significance to yourself is absolute, even if your significance to the universe is 0. It's the kind of philosophical insight that feels profound at 3 a.m. on the middle watch, and probably seems obvious in daylight, but right now, standing here in the darkness, it hits with the weight of revelation. The ship's bell rings. 3 bells marking 1:30 in the morning. You've got 2.5 more hours of this. The singing from the other ship has stopped. The stars wheel overhead in their patient rotation. The water laps against the hull with the rhythm of someone who has all the time in the world because, from the water's perspective, it does. You're the one in a hurry, the one counting down the minutes until relief, the one whose entire existence is constrained by time and biology, and the need to sleep but the inability to do so while you're standing watch. You lean against the rail and study the constellation Orion, picking out the individual stars you know names for. Betelgeuse, Rigel, the 3 stars of the belt. These same stars were looked at by ancient Greeks, medieval Arabs, Polynesian navigators, and countless sailors before you. You're participating in a tradition as old as seafaring itself, standing watch in darkness, looking up at the sky, feeling very small and very alone and very cold. But at least you're alive. The stars are beautiful. The water is calm. Nobody is actively trying to kill you at this exact moment, which is more than can be said for when you're actually hunting whales. You'll take small mercies where you can find them. The middle watch grinds on, eternal and lonely, while you keep your vigil against the night. 4 a.m. finally arrives like a benediction, and you're relieved by a sailor whose name you don't know, but whose presence means you can stop standing watch and go collapse into unconsciousness. You stumble toward the forecastle hatch on legs that have forgotten how to bend properly, every muscle in your body filing formal complaints about the treatment it's received over the past 24 hours. Sleep. You're going to sleep. The thought sustains you through the descent into the darkened forecastle, through navigating the obstacle course of sea chests by touch, through locating your hammock in the gloom. The forecastle has transformed into a symphony of human sounds. Approximately 15 men are currently attempting to sleep. and each one has their own unique contribution to the auditory chaos. There's the deep rumbling snore from Tucker's hammock that sounds like a bear with a head cold, the whistling wheeze from someone across the space that's almost musical in its regularity. Someone else produces a stuttering snort-gasp-snort pattern that suggests their breathing passages are engaged in active warfare. And threading through it all, the various grunts, mutters, and unconscious vocalizations of men deep in dreams that are probably more pleasant than their waking reality. You approach your hammock with the caution of someone who's already learned this lesson the hard way. Sit in the middle. Swing your legs up. Don't overthink it. You manage to wedge yourself into the canvas cocoon without falling or waking your neighbours, a minor miracle that probably deserves a medal. The hammock wraps around you immediately, cocooning you in a tube of rough fabric that smells like old sweat, salt, and the indefinable funk of canvas that's been damp for weeks. Here's your mainstream historical fact about hammock sleeping. Hammocks were actually superior to bunks for sailors because they self-leveled as the ship rolled, meaning you swayed with the ship's motion rather than sliding around in a fixed bed. They also maximize space efficiency. You could pack more hammocks into a given area than bunks, because they could be hung closer together and at different heights. Navy ships sometimes hung hammocks so close that sailors were literally touching their neighbours on both sides, which is cozy if you're generous and horrifying if you're honest. Your neighbours are close enough that you can feel their body heat, one on each side, maybe 6 inches of air gap between you. On your left, someone's hammock sways in a rhythm slightly out of sync with yours, creating a lazy collision every few seconds where your canvas bumps against theirs. On your right, your neighbour is one of the champion snorers, producing sounds that could probably be weaponized under the right circumstances. You're wedged into this intimate proximity with men you barely know, sharing airspace and body heat and the general misery of trying to sleep in a wooden cave that rocks constantly. But you're so exhausted that even the snoring and the proximity and the smell don't matter. Your body has transcended comfort requirements and entered a state of sleep or die, and sleep is winning. The hammock's swaying motion, which seemed awkward and unnatural your first night, now feels almost soothing. A gentle rocking that reminds your lizard brain of being a baby, or maybe being on the verge of passing out. It's hard to tell the difference. The ship continues its constant conversation with the water. Creak, groan, slap, splash. The wooden hull flexing, the waves hitting. Somewhere above, the anchor watch paces the deck, their footsteps a muffled rhythm that marks time you're no longer responsible for tracking. You're off duty, released from obligations, free to simply exist in this swinging canvas tube while your body attempts to repair itself through the magic of unconsciousness. Here's your quirky detail about hammock culture. Sailors developed elaborate unofficial rules about hammock etiquette. You never woke a sleeping sailor unless the ship was actively sinking, you never stole someone's hammock spot, and you absolutely never cut down another sailor's hammock as a prank, because that was considered grounds for justified violence. Your hammock was your only private space in a world without privacy, the one place that was exclusively yours. Historians still argue whether the fierce protection of hammock rights represented genuine territorial instinct, or whether it was simply that hammocks were the only thing sailors actually owned and controlled, making them symbolically important beyond their practical value. Your mind starts that strange descent into sleep, where thoughts fragment and recombine in ways that make perfect sense until you try to examine them. You're standing watch, but the watch is somehow also a whale, and you need to climb the whale to take a star sight, but your sextant has turned into a scrimshaw tooth, and Tucker's telling you about navigation but speaking in a language made entirely of snoring sounds. It makes perfect dream logic sense, which is how you know you're slipping under. The swaying intensifies, or maybe you're just becoming more aware of it as conscious thought releases its grip. The hammock rocks you like the world's least comfortable cradle, and somewhere in your rapidly dissolving awareness, you register that this motion, this constant gentle swaying, will be your reality for years. You'll sleep in motion, wake in motion, eat, work, and exist in motion. The stable ground you took for granted for your entire life has been replaced by a platform that never stops moving, and your body's going to have to adapt or spend the entire voyage being miserable. But right now, adaptation can wait. Right now, there's only the sweet release of not having to be conscious anymore. Your muscles unclench, your breathing deepens. The sounds of the forecastle, snoring, creaking, water slapping, the ship's groaning, blend into a single ambient wash that your brain categorizes as safe enough to ignore. The darkness is complete behind your closed eyelids, and you're sinking into it like falling into water, down and down into the blessed absence of thought. Someone's hammock bumps against yours. You don't care. Someone else coughs wetly, probably developing whatever lung ailment will plague the crew for the next 6 months. You don't care about that either. The rat's scurrying somewhere near your head. Surprisingly, you don't even care about that. You're beyond caring, beyond awareness, beyond everything except the absolute necessity of sleep. Your last semi-conscious thought is that you've got maybe 3 hours before the next watch rotation. 3 hours of this swinging darkness before someone shakes you awake and demands you return to the world of being functional and competent. 3 hours feel simultaneously like a luxury and a cruel joke. Your land brain, the one still accustomed to 8-hour sleep cycles, screams that it's not enough. Your sea brain, the one that's rapidly developing to replace it, accepts that this is life now. Fragments of sleep stolen between watch rotations, your rest schedule determined by the ship's needs rather than your body's preferences. The hammock sways, the ship breathes, your neighbours snore in their various keys and rhythms, and you fall, gratefully, into sleep so deep it's almost indistinguishable from death, except for the occasional snort when someone's particularly aggressive snoring penetrates your unconsciousness, enough to make you briefly surface before diving back down. Hours pass, or maybe minutes. Time doesn't work right when work. You're this exhausted. You dream of stars and water, of climbing rigging that stretches into infinity, of whales that speak with Mr. Coffin's voice and give you orders you can't quite understand. The dreams are vivid and nonsensical and immediately forgotten, leaving only a vague sense of unease mixed with a deeper relief of not being awake. The forecastle continues its function as mass bedroom, storage facility, and cave of semi-conscious bodies. 20 men sleep, snore, dream, and occasionally wake for brief moments before surrendering again to exhaustion. The lamp has burned down to almost nothing, casting shadows that are really just slightly different shades of darkness. The air is thick with human respiration, a fog of carbon dioxide and body heat that makes every breath taste used. But you're asleep. Finally, deeply, and that's all that matters. The world can wait, the voyage can wait, everything can wait while you steal these precious hours of unconsciousness, wedged between strangers in a swinging canvas tube on a ship that rocks eternally, in a harbour you'll leave tomorrow. But that's a problem for the future version of you, the one who has to wake up and be functional again. Right now, you're just a body-maintaining baseline existence, breathing and swaying and sleeping without thought or worry or consciousness. The hammock cradles you in its rough embrace, and you sleep the sleep of the utterly exhausted, dreamless and deep and completely inadequate, but the best you're going to get. Someone's boot finds your ribs with the precision of a guided missile, and you jolt awake with a gasp that's half surprise and half outrage. Your eyes snap open to find the dim forecastle, barely brighter than when you collapsed into sleep, which makes sense, because according to your body's internal clock, approximately 17 seconds have passed, though it's probably closer to 3 hours. A voice cuts through the fog of your consciousness. Up, green hand, morning watch, move it. You extract yourself from the hammock with all the grace of a drunk sloth, every muscle protesting in its own unique voice. Your back has apparently aged 40 years overnight. Your hands are stiff and sore from yesterday's rope work. Your knees make sounds that bones shouldn't make when you stand. You're 19 years old and feel like you're approaching death from old age and exhaustion simultaneously. The forecastle is experiencing its morning ritual, men stumbling around in various states of consciousness, bumping into sea chests, cursing quietly as they search for dry socks that don't exist, and generally demonstrating that humans were not designed to wake up after 3 hours of sleep and immediately be functional. Tucker's somehow already dressed and heading topside, which suggests he's either superhuman or has long since abandoned the need for adequate rest. You're leaning towards superhuman. You pull on your boots, still damp from last night's squall, because of course they are, and follow the general migration toward the ladder. Your stomach informs you that it would very much like breakfast, but your experience suggests that breakfast is a distant dream, and you'll be lucky to get coffee that tastes like it was brewed using seawater and despair. On deck, the world is caught in that strange transitional moment between night and day. The eastern horizon shows the first hint of light, not sunrise yet, just a subtle brightening that suggests the sun is thinking about making an appearance eventually. The stars are still visible overhead, though fading, and the harbour water reflects this in-between lighting in a way that makes it look like liquid pewter. It would be beautiful if you weren't so tired that beauty feels like a personal insult. Here's your mainstream historical fact about watch rotations. The traditional ship's day was divided into 7 watches of 4 hours each, with the dog watches from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. split into 2 2-hour periods. This created an odd number of watches, which meant sailors rotated through different times rather than being stuck with the same schedule forever. So if you stood the middle watch today, you'd get a different watch tomorrow, and the day after that. The system prevented any one group from being permanently assigned to the worst shifts, which was democratic in theory, but just meant everyone got to experience maximum sleep deprivation on a rotating basis. Mr. Sherman appears from the gloom like a nautical vampire. Right, gentlemen, last morning in port. Let's make it count. Deck needs a final scrub, all loose gear needs stowing, and I want the anchor cable inspected before we weigh it. He looks directly at you. Greenhand, you're on deck scrubbing duty. See if you can do it right this time without making the wood somehow dirtier. You collect the holystone and bucket with the enthusiasm of someone heading to their own execution. The deck is already pretty clean from yesterday's obsessive scrubbing, but apparently Mr. Sherman subscribes to the philosophy that if something's worth doing, it's worth doing again immediately despite it being pointless. You kneel on the damp planks and start scrubbing, watching the sky gradually brighten with each pass of the stone. The harbour is waking up around you, other ships are showing signs of life, figures moving on decks, smoke rising from galley fires, the occasional shouted order carrying across the water. A fishing boat rows past, the oarsman giving you a wave that you're too tired to return properly. Seagulls are starting their morning routine of being aggressively loud about their existence and demanding food from anyone who'll listen. Here's your quirky detail about departure mornings. Some sailors believed that washing the deck on departure day was bad luck because you were washing away the voyage's success. Others believed not washing the deck was bad luck because you were starting dirty, which obviously meant the voyage would be dirty too. Historians still argue whether these superstitions had any basis in practical concerns, like the very real problem of having a clean deck for better traction during the chaos of departure, or whether sailors just made up contradictory superstitions because having something to worry about felt better than admitting they had zero control over their fate. The sun finally breaks the horizon, and the transformation is immediate. The pewter water becomes gold. The ship's white canvas, visible on other vessels, glows like they're lit from within. Even the dirty harbour water looks momentarily beautiful in the horizontal morning light. You pause in your scrubbing to watch, which is a mistake because Mr. Sherman materializes behind you instantly. Fascinating sunrise, Greenhand. Seen one before, have you? Because we've got about 200 more ahead of us, and I'd prefer if you finish your work before we're all old men. You return to scrubbing with renewed vigour, or at least renewed awareness that Mr. Sherman is watching. Around you, the final preparations for departure are accelerating. The cooper is inspecting barrels in the hold, making sure they're properly secured for the ocean crossing ahead. The carpenter is doing a final check of the whaleboat davits, the wooden arms that hold the boats and swing them out when needed. The cook is below, presumably committing crimes against food in preparation for breakfast. The captain emerges from his cabin, and the usual hush falls over the ship. He surveys the deck with an expression that gives away nothing, nods once at Mr. Coffin, and returns below. That single nod apparently communicated entire paragraphs of information, because Mr. Coffin immediately starts barking orders about preparing to weigh anchor. You finish your section of deck, smooth enough to satisfy even Mr. Sherman's exacting standards, and are immediately reassigned to help with the anchor cable. This involves descending into a forward compartment called the cable tier, where the massive anchor rope is coiled in layers like a sleeping sea serpent. Your job is to check each section of the cable as it's hauled in, looking for frayed spots, weak points, or damage that might cause it to fail at a critical moment. The cable is 3 inches thick, made of hemp rope that's been tarred until it's stiff and black, and smells like every bad decision the textile industry has ever made. Each link, if you can call the rope sections links, is heavier than you expected, and running your hands along it looking for damage gives you a visceral appreciation for just how much force this rope has to withstand. It's holding a multi-ton iron anchor against current and wind, and the ship's tendency to drift. The fact that it's just plant fibres twisted together seems inadequate to the task, but apparently it works, or has worked so far, which isn't quite the same thing, but close enough. A sailor named Jenkins is working with you, and he points out what to look for. See there? That's just surface wear, nothing critical. But if you see this, he indicates a section where individual fibres have separated from the main body, that's trouble. It means the rope's integrity is compromised and it might part under load, which when you're anchored in a storm is the worst possible time to discover your anchor rope is faulty. You continue inspecting, finding mostly surface wear and one concerning spot that Jenkins marks for the bosun to examine later. Your hands are black with tar by the time you finish, and the smell has permanently embedded itself in your nose. You're starting to understand that tar-stained sailor isn't just a colourful description, it's a literal statement of what happens to anyone who works with ships for more than 5 minutes. Above, you hear the distinctive sound of the capstan being manned, the rhythmic clank of the pawls as sailors push the long wooden bars around, slowly winding in the anchor cable. The ship is preparing to leave harbour, to trade the relative safety of anchorage for the absolute uncertainty of the open ocean. And you're about to go with it, whether you're ready or not. You climb back on deck, rubbing your tar-blackened hands on your already filthy trousers, and watch as the anchor cable rises from the depths, dripping harbour water and trailing bits of seaweed. The anchor itself emerges like some ancient sea creature, barnacles clinging to its iron flukes, proof that even a few days at rest is enough for the ocean to start claiming ownership. Mr. Coffin's voice rises above the working sounds. Anchors aweigh. Prepare to make sail. This is it. You're leaving. The voyage is actually beginning. Your stomach does something complicated that's part excitement, part terror, and part the very real possibility that you're going to throw up from exhaustion and anxiety combined. Welcome to day one of the rest of your whaling career. You're awake, you're working, and you have no idea what you're doing. But at least you're moving forward, which is more than can be said for some life choices. The first thing you learn about a ship under sail versus a ship at anchor is that gravity stops being a reliable constant and becomes more of a suggestion that's occasionally followed. The Patience clears the harbour mouth, catches the open ocean swell, and suddenly the gentle rocking you've grown accustomed to transforms into something more aggressive. The deck tilts, levels, tilts the other direction, and throws in the occasional unexpected dip just to keep things interesting. You're trying to coil rope while the surface you're standing on is actively trying to throw you overboard. "Sea legs, green hand," Tucker calls cheerfully as he passes, moving across the tilted deck with the casual confidence of someone whose inner ear has made peace with chaos. You'll get him eventually, or you'll spend the voyage on your hands and knees. Either way works. You focus on the rope coiling task with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb, because if you think too hard about the motion, your stomach starts filing complaints with management. The key you're discovering is to move with the ship rather than fighting it. Anticipate the roll, shift your weight, let your knees absorb the changes. In theory, this is simple. In practice, you look like a drunk person trying to walk a tightrope while someone shakes the rope. The morning routine continues despite the ship's motion, because apparently the ocean doesn't care about your comfort and neither does the schedule. Mr. Sherman has you and the other green hands doing a final deck inspection, checking that everything's properly secured now that you're actually moving. Loose gear on a rolling deck becomes projectile weapons, and nobody wants to explain to the captain how a careless green hand let a barrel roll across the deck and brain the second mate. Here's your mainstream historical fact about the transition from harbour to sea. The first few days of a voyage were statistically the most dangerous for accidents, as crew members adjusted from stable ground to constant motion. Ship's logs show elevated rates of falls, rope burns, crushing injuries from shifting cargo, and general mayhem as men who'd been standing on solid docks for weeks had to rapidly remember, or learn for the first time, how to function on a moving platform. Smart captains kept the first few days sailing relatively easy, building up to more complex manoeuvres as the crew found their sea legs. Your captain apparently subscribes to the throw them in the deep end school of thought, because you're already being asked to work aloft while the ship pitches. The smell changes as you leave land behind. The harbour funk, that mixture of human waste, dead fish and industrial activity, fades, replaced by clean salt air that tastes like it's never been breathed before. It's sharp and cold and somehow makes you feel more awake despite your profound exhaustion. You can still see land as a dark line on the horizon behind you, but it's shrinking steadily, and with it goes your last connection to stability and sense. Below deck, the cook is performing his morning ritual of transforming ingredients into something technically edible. You can smell it from topside: salt pork frying, coffee brewing, and something that might be biscuits or might be the cook's attempt to weaponize flour. Your stomach, despite its motion-induced uncertainty, perks up at the smell of food, even bad food. It's been hours since that terrible supper, and your body is willing to accept pretty much anything that contains calories. "Green hand, below to the galley!" Mr. Sherman's voice cuts through your thoughts. "Breakfast is ready, and you're fetching for the larboard watch. Move it!" You navigate the ladder down, more challenging now that it's moving in 3 dimensions, and make your way to the galley. The cook, Briggs, presides over his domain like a very grumpy king of a very small, very hot kingdom. The galley is barely larger than a closet, dominated by the cast-iron stove that's currently radiating heat, like the sun decided to take up residence below deck. Briggs himself is sweating profusely, swearing creatively, and wielding a spatula like a weapon. "Larboard watch," he grunts. "You confirm." He starts loading a wooden tray with tin plates of food. Fried salt pork that's mostly fat, hardtack biscuits that could probably stop bullets, and tin cups of coffee so strong it looks like it might eat through the metal. "Don't drop it. I ain't cooking twice." You take the tray and immediately understand why this is a 2-person job normally. The ship rolls, the tray shifts, the plate starts sliding, and you perform a complicated juggling act just to keep everything from ending up on the floor. You make it back to the deck through sheer determination and possibly divine intervention, where your watchmates are waiting with expressions that suggest they were betting on whether you'd make it. Here's your quirky detail about ship's cooks. They were traditionally older sailors who'd been injured and could no longer perform regular deck duties, or younger sailors who demonstrated complete incompetence at everything else and were relegated to cooking as a last resort. This meant ship's cooks ranged from genuinely skilled men who treated their role with pride to complete disasters who could barely boil water. Historians still argue whether the universally terrible reputation of ship's food was due to limited ingredients and preservation methods, or whether maritime culture simply accepted horrible cooking as inevitable and stopped trying. Your money's on both factors contributing equally. Breakfast happens standing up, leaning against whatever solid object is nearby, with one hand for eating and one hand for holding on when the ship rolls. The salt pork is chewy and overwhelmingly salty. The hardtack requires strategic soaking in coffee before it's even theoretically edible. The coffee tastes like bitterness was distilled into liquid form and then made worse somehow. It's the worst breakfast you've ever had, and you're grateful for every bite because it's fuel, and fuel is all that matters when you're working on 3 hours of sleep with another watch rotation coming. Tucker manages to make his hardtack look almost appetizing through the simple technique of not caring about taste and just consuming calories efficiently. "You get used to it," he says, noting your expression. "Another month and you won't even notice how bad it is. You'll just be grateful it's food-shaped and fits in your mouth." The ship continues her roll and pitch, finding her rhythm in the ocean swell. You're learning to anticipate the movements. That hesitation at the top of a roll before she tips the other direction, the slight drop when she goes down into a trough between waves, the way she sometimes catches a wave wrong and shudders like she's offended by the ocean's behavior. It's a dance, you're realizing, between the ship and the water, and you're just along for the ride, hoping nobody steps on your feet. Around you, the actual sailors of the larboard watch are eating and working simultaneously, adjusting lines, checking the set of the sails, going through the constant maintenance that keeps a wooden ship functional. They make it look effortless, moving across the rolling deck with cups of coffee in hand, never spilling, never falling, completely integrated with the ship's motion. You spill approximately half your coffee down your front within the first 5 minutes, and consider it a victory that you didn't spill all of it. The morning light strengthens, revealing the ocean in all its empty vastness. Water in every direction, stretching to horizons that seem impossibly far away, and somehow too close at the same time. The land is gone now, fully disappeared behind you, and you're in that transitional space where you're not really anywhere. No longer in port, not yet in the hunting grounds, just at sea. Existing in the space between destinations, surrounded by water that doesn't care about your schedule or your comfort or your survival. You finish your breakfast and hand the tin plate back to the collection bucket. Your stomach is full, your body is exhausted, and your mind is trying to process the reality that this this rolling deck, this terrible food, this constant motion, is your life now. Not for days or weeks, but potentially for years. Mr. Sherman appears with a new task, because of course he does. Deck needs swabbing again. Salt spray's made it slippery. And Green Hand, try not to fall overboard. The paperwork is annoying. You collect the swab and bucket, position yourself on the rolling deck, and start the process of cleaning a surface that the ocean is actively trying to make dirty again. The routine continues, endless and repetitive, while the ship sails on and the sun climbs higher and your old life recedes behind you like the disappearing coastline. Welcome to the morning, routine at sea, where every simple task becomes an exercise in balance, patience, and not dying while trying to accomplish basic chores. It's glamorous, really, if your definition of glamour includes terror, exhaustion, and really bad coffee. You're midway through your fourth pass with the swab when a voice from high above cuts through the morning routine like a lightning bolt. There she blows, whale off the starboard bow. The effect is instantaneous and electric. Every person on deck freezes for a half second, just long enough to register the words. Then the ship explodes into coordinated chaos. Mr. Coffin's voice booms, "All hands, clear for action, stand by the boats." Men who were casually working suddenly move with purpose, abandoning whatever they were doing and racing toward assigned positions. You stand there with your swab dripping on the deck, completely lost, while the ship transforms into something alive and predatory around you. "Don't just stand there, Green Hand," Tucker grabs your shoulder as he rushes past. "Boat's crew, you're with me. We're manning boat 3. You drop the swab and follow him toward the starboard side, where the whale boats hang in their davits, like massive wooden seeds waiting to be planted in the ocean. The boat is maybe 30 feet long, narrow and sleek, painted white with a sharp bow that looks designed to cut through water at speed. 5 men are already gathering around it, checking gear with practiced efficiency that makes your complete ignorance even more obvious. The lookout's voice comes again from the masthead. She's sounding. 2 miles off, maybe less. Big one, 60-barrel bull at least. Here's your mainstream historical fact about whale spotting. Experienced lookouts could identify different whale species by the shape and height of their spout from remarkable distances. Sperm whales produced a distinctive forward-angled blow, right whales had a V-shaped double spout, and humpbacks created a bushy column of mist. A skilled lookout could estimate a whale's size, species, and even its mood from these visual clues alone, giving the crew crucial information for deciding whether to pursue. Your lookout has just called a 60-barrel bull, a large male sperm whale that, if successfully caught and processed, would yield about 60 barrels of valuable sperm oil. This is the money shot, the reason you're all here. Mr. Whitfield, the second mate and your boat's officer, appears and starts checking equipment with the intensity of someone performing pre-flight checks on a spacecraft. Harpoon secured, line properly coiled, lantern trimmed, water keg full. Each question receives a crisp affirmation from the experienced crew. You have no idea what you're supposed to be checking, so you just try to look competent while standing near the boat and hoping nobody asks you to confirm anything technical. The ship's course changes. You feel it in the deck's movement, as the captain angles toward the whales, last known position. Sails are adjusted with shouted commands you don't understand, and the Patience picks up speed, heeling slightly to port as she catches more wind. The transformation from sleepy morning routine to focused hunting machine has taken maybe 3 minutes, and you're still processing what's happening. Green Hand, listen sharp. Mr. Whitfield grabs your attention. You're shipkeeper today. You stay aboard the Patience while we hunt. Your job is to watch our boat from deck, keep the captain informed of our position, and for God's sake, don't let anything important catch fire or sink while we're gone. Can you handle that? You nod, equal parts relieved that you're not getting into that fragile boat and disappointed that you're missing the actual hunt. Mr. Whitfield reads your expression and almost smiles. Don't worry, you'll get your turn soon enough. Most men wish they could stay aboard their first hunt. The reality of chasing a creature that can smash your boat to kindling has a way of making shore duty seem appealing. Here's your quirky detail about first hunts. It was traditional aboard many whaling ships to keep green hands aboard as shipkeepers during the first few whale encounters, specifically to let them watch the hunt from relative safety. The logic was twofold. It prevented inexperienced sailors from panicking and endangering their boat crews, and it gave them a chance to see what they were getting into before they had to actually do it. Historians still argue whether this was genuine concern for greenhand safety or just practical recognition that terrified, untrained sailors were worse than useless in a whaleboat. Probably both. The lookout calls again. She's breached, dead ahead, 1 mile. You rush to the rail and scan the horizon, and there, impossible to miss now, you see it. The whale breaks the surface maybe a mile away, its massive body rising from the water like a small island suddenly deciding to exist. Even at this distance, the size is staggering. The creature is easily as long as your whaleboat, probably longer, a living mountain of muscle and blubber and lethal potential that's currently doing what whales do, existing peacefully in the ocean and having absolutely no idea that a ship full of men with sharp implements is bearing down on it with economic incentives. The spout is visible now even without the lookout's announcement, a forward-angled fountain of mist that catches the morning light like a prism. The whale blows, the spray drifts, and then the massive head dips below the surface as the creature sounds, diving deep. Its tail flukes rise from the water, each fluke larger than a man, pause at the vertical like a salute or a warning, and then slip beneath the waves with barely a ripple. She's running south, the lookout confirms, making good speed. The ship adjusts course again, and you can feel the tension thrumming through every line and plank. This is what everyone's here for. This moment. This hunt. All the terrible food, the sleep deprivation, the brutal work, the danger. It's all in service of this, getting close enough to a creature that could kill you effortlessly, driving a harpoon into its flesh, and hoping you survive the aftermath. Captain Barnes appears on the quarterdeck, and his presence commands immediate attention. Mr. Coffin, ready the boats. We'll pursue until she surfaces again, then lower. Wind's in our favour, sea state's good, we have every advantage. Let's make this count, gentlemen. The experienced sailors are vibrating with anticipation. Tucker's grinning like a madman. The harpooners are checking their irons, the harpoons, with the focused intensity of samurai examining katanas. Even crusty old Briggs has emerged from the galley to watch, wiping his hands on his apron and squinting at the horizon where the whale disappeared. You grip the rail and watch the empty ocean where the whale was, your heart hammering with a combination of excitement and terror and the visceral realization that this is real. Not a story, not an adventure tale, but actual reality where men in wooden boats chase animals that can destroy them on a whim, all for barrels of oil that'll burn in lamps in cities you'll never see. The lookout's voice cuts through the tension. She surfaces, half-mile, holding position. Mr. Coffin's command thunders across the deck. Lower away, all boats. This is it. The hunt begins, and you're going to watch it happen from the relative safety of the ship, which suddenly feels less like safety and more like being excluded from the most important event of your entire voyage. The davits creak as the boats begin their descent toward the water, and your first whale hunt is about to teach you exactly what you've signed up for. The davits swing outward with a mechanical groan that sounds like the ship itself protesting this madness. The whale boats, which look substantial when hanging at rest, suddenly seem absurdly fragile as they're lowered toward the ocean on ropes and pulleys. You're watching Boat 3, Tucker's boat, the one you'd be in if Mr. Whitfield hadn't decided you were more valuable as shipkeeper, and it's descending jerkily, swaying with each movement, looking like it might flip or drop or spontaneously combust from sheer anxiety. The crew doesn't wait for the boat to reach the water. They're already climbing down the side of the ship on rope ladders, timing their descent to match the boat's lowering progress. Tucker goes over the rail like he's done this 1,000 times, because he probably has, hand over hand down the Jacob's ladder, with the casual confidence of someone who hasn't considered the possibility of falling into the ocean and being crushed between the ship and the descending boat. You consider this possibility extensively while watching, your knuckles white on the rail. "Mind the painter?" someone shouts, and you have no idea what a painter is, but apparently it's important because 3 men lunge for a rope at the boat's bow, keeping it from swinging into the ship's hull as the ocean swell tries to dash it to pieces. The coordination required is staggering, men timing their movements to the roll of the ship, the descent of the boat, and the random chaos of waves, all while not dying. Here's your mainstream historical fact about whaleboat launches. This was statistically one of the most dangerous parts of whaling, with more injuries and deaths occurring during boat launching and recovery than during the actual hunt. Men fell between the ship and boat, were struck by swinging davits, drowned when boats flipped during deployment, or were crushed when something went wrong with the lowering mechanism. The rush to get boats in the water before the whale escaped created pressure to move fast, which created opportunities for fatal mistakes. Every successful launch was a minor miracle of coordination and luck. Boat 3 hits the water with a smack that sounds painful, and immediately the crew is scrambling in, taking their positions with the practiced choreography of people who've drilled this so many times, it's become muscle memory. The harpooner, a Portuguese sailor named Silva who you've barely spoken to, takes his position at the bow, standing with his harpoon like some ancient warrior preparing for battle. The boat's officer, Mr. Whitfield, settles into the stern, hand on the steering oar that's larger than you and looks impossible to control. The painter is cast off. That's the bow rope you're learning through context, and suddenly the boat is free, bobbing in the ocean swell beside the ship. The crew grabs their oars and starts pulling, and the transformation is immediate. The boat that looked fragile, hanging from davits, suddenly becomes a dart, sleek and fast, cutting through the water with purpose. 5 men rowing in perfect unison, the oars dipping and pulling with a rhythm that's almost hypnotic, driving the boat forward at speed that seems impossible for human-powered wood. Around you, the other 2 boats are experiencing similar chaos into coordination transformations. Boat 1, commanded by Mr. Coffin himself, is already 50 yards from the ship, pulling hard toward where the whale was last seen. Boat 2 is just clearing the Patience's side, the crew settling into their positions and finding their rowing rhythm. It's like watching 3 separate orchestras all playing different songs that somehow harmonize into a single purpose. Get to that whale before it sounds again and disappears into the deep. Green Hand, eyes on boat 3. The captain's voice cuts through your fascination. He's at the rail nearby, telescope to his eye, tracking the boat's progress. Call out if they signal for assistance or if you see them strike. You focus on boat 3, Tucker's boat, which is now 100 yards out and pulling steadily toward the horizon where the whale's spout was last visible. From this distance, the men are already small, the boat a white sliver on the blue-grey water. You can see the oars rising and falling in perfect time, see the occasional flash of spray when they hit a wave at the wrong angle, but details are fading fast as distance swallows them. Here's your quirky detail about whaleboat crews. The rowing positions had specific names and hierarchy. The stroke oar set the pace, the others matched him, and the least experienced oarsman typically took the midship positions where timing errors were less catastrophic. But the harpooner, despite being the star of the show, did no rowing during the approach. He stood in the bow conserving his strength, because driving a harpoon into a whale required every ounce of power and precision, and you didn't waste that energy on rowing. It was the maritime equivalent of saving your best player for the critical moment, which makes perfect sense except when you're watching 5 guys row themselves to exhaustion, while one guy just stands there looking dramatic. The boats spread out as they approached the whale's last known position, maintaining distance from each other to cover more area. It's strategic. If the whale surfaces between them, at least one boat will be in position to strike. If it surfaces far from all of them, they'll have to row like mad to close the distance before it sounds again. Whales don't cooperate with hunting plans, and the crews are gambling on intercept courses and luck. You're gripping the rail hard enough to leave impressions, completely absorbed in watching 3 tiny boats pursue a creature that could destroy all of them without effort. The scale is incomprehensible from here. The boats are specks, the whale is invisible, the ocean is vast and indifferent, and somewhere out there men are about to drive sharp metal into a living animal for profit. It's brutal and economic and somehow beautiful in its terrifying precision. "She blows!" The lookout's voice from the masthead makes you jump. 1/4 mile from boat 1, she's holding. You can't see the whale yet, your eyes aren't trained like the lookout's, but you see boat 1 change course, the oars suddenly pulling harder, driving the boat towards some point on the horizon that you can't quite identify. Then boat 3 adjusts too, angling to intercept, and you realise they're converging on a point just beyond your clear vision. The captain's beside you now, telescope trained on the action. "She's a bull, all right. Big one. If Coffin can strike true and the line holds, we're looking at 60, maybe 70 barrels. That's $3,000 worth of oil if the price holds." He glances at you. "That's your entire lay right there, Green Hand, in one whale. Assuming we catch it. Assuming we don't lose the boats. Assuming it doesn't kill anyone." The casual way he lists potential disasters makes your stomach clench. You watch boat 3, impossibly small now, maybe 300 yards out, as the crew rows, with everything they have toward a whale you still can't see. Tucker's out there, Silver with his harpoon, Mr. Whitfield steering, 5 men in a wooden boat chasing a creature that weighs 40 tons and doesn't want to be caught. Historians still argue whether the whaler's courage in pursuing such dangerous prey represented legitimate bravery, desperate economic necessity, or simply the human capacity to ignore danger when it becomes routine. From your position watching from relative safety, it looks like pure insanity mixed with skill and a healthy dose of what could possibly go wrong. The boats continue their approach, getting smaller with distance, while you stand at the rail with nothing to do but watch and worry, and slowly understand what your shipmates are risking for barrels of oil that you'll all split according to a formula that heavily favours people who aren't in those boats. "Ready about, Mr. Sherman," the captain calls calmly. "We'll need to manoeuvre for recovery once they strike, assuming they strike." Everything's assumptions out here, assuming the whale cooperates, assuming the harpoon holds, assuming nobody dies. You watch the distant boats and realise that assumption is the only certainty in whaling. The assumption that today might be the day everything goes wrong. The hunt continues beyond your clear vision, and you're left watching, waiting, and learning exactly what it means to be the person who stays safe while others risk everything. For a long moment, nothing happens. The boats are distant white marks on the water, the whale is invisible somewhere beneath the surface, and you're standing at the rail feeling your heart hammer against your ribs for no immediate reason. The ocean looks peaceful. The morning sun glints off gentle swells. It's almost serene, which should be your first clue that something terrible is about to happen. Then the whale surfaces. Even from 300 yards away, even as a distant dark shape, the size is shocking. It's not a fish that got big. It's a fundamental reassessment of what big means. The creature rises from the water like a submarine surfacing, water sheeting off its back, and you can see the distinctive rectangular head of a sperm whale, that massive box of flesh and oil that makes up a third of its body length. The spout erupts, that forward-angled blow that the lookout identified, and in the morning light it's a rainbow for a split second before becoming just mist. Boat 1 is close. Too close, maybe, or exactly the right distance depending on whether you're optimistic or realistic about what comes next. You see the tiny figures change their rhythm, the oars ship suddenly pulled inboard, and the boat glides forward on momentum. The harpooner moves, raising his weapon, and even at this distance you can sense the coiled tension of a man about to throw everything he's got at a target that could kill him by accident. The harpoon flies. You don't actually see it. The distance is too great, the iron too small, but you see the aftermath. The whale's reaction is immediate and violent. The massive tail flukes come up out of the water, each fluke longer than a man is tall, and slam down with enough force that you see the splash from here. The boat nearly capsizes from the wave it creates, tilting at an angle that suggests it's about to flip, but somehow it rights itself. Here's your mainstream historical fact about harpooning. The goal wasn't to kill the whale immediately. That was impossible with the technology available. The harpoon was barbed to hold fast in the blubber, attached to hundreds of fathoms of rope coiled in the boat. Once struck, the whale would run, dragging the boat behind it in what sailors called a Nantucket sleigh ride. The exhausted whale could then be approached for the kill lance, a longer, sharper weapon designed to reach vital organs. Immediate death was fantasy. Extended, brutal pursuit was reality. The whale sounds, dives deep, and suddenly the rope in boat 1 starts smoking as it pays out at incredible speed. You can see it from here, a blur of hemp racing out of the boat, and you remember the warnings about keeping hands and feet clear because that rope moving at speed could take a limb off cleanly. The boat lurches forward, suddenly moving faster than any rowing could achieve, towed by 40 tons of terrified, angry whale that wants nothing more than to escape the sharp pain in its side. "There she goes," the captain says, almost appreciatively. "Good strike. Now let's see if the line holds and the whale tires before the crew does." The boat skims across the water at a speed that looks suicidal, bouncing over waves, spray flying, the crew hanging on while the whale drags them on a tour of the local ocean at velocities boats weren't designed for. It's heading south now, away from the ship, and Boat 3, Tucker's boat, is rowing hard to intercept, trying to get close enough to strike if Boat 1's line parts or the whale surfaces within range. This is the part they don't tell you about in the recruitment posters. The Nantucket sleigh ride sounds fun, almost playful, until you realise it's being towed by a creature that's simultaneously fleeing in panic and potentially planning revenge. The whale could sound so deep it drowns the crew by pulling the boat under. It could turn and attack. It could head for the ship and try to ram it. It's happened before, famously in at least one case that ended with the ship at the bottom of the ocean and most of the crew dead. Right now, that whale has more control over Boat 1's fate than any of the men in it. Here's your quirky detail about whale reactions to harpooning. Some whales, particularly bulls who'd been struck before and escaped, seemed to understand that the boats were the threat rather than just fleeing blindly. These experienced whales would actively attack boats, using their heads as battering rams or their tails as clubs. Whalers called them fighting whales and approached them with extra caution, though caution, in whaling terms, still meant getting close enough to stab them. Historians still argue whether these aggressive behaviours represented genuine tactical thinking or simply pain-driven lashing out that occasionally targeted the correct threat. But from a practical standpoint, it didn't matter. A whale actively trying to kill you was more dangerous regardless of its reasoning. Boat 1 is maybe half a mile away now, still being towed, and you've lost the details. You can see it's still moving, which means the crew's still alive and the rope's still holding, but that's about all. The captain's tracking them with his telescope, occasionally muttering observations. Holding steady, crew's bailing, probably took water over the bow. Whale's tiring, I think, slowing down. Then the whale breaches. It doesn't just surface. It throws itself completely out of the water in a display that defies physics and common sense. 40 tons of whale achieving something approaching flight, body twisting, flukes thrashing, water streaming off in torrents, and for a moment it hangs in the air like the ocean itself decided to become an animal. It crashes back down with an impact you can hear from the ship, a thunderous boom that carries across the water like a cannon shot. The boat survives this, somehow. You can see it still moving, still being towed, still intact despite the whale, landing close enough that the wave must have swamped them. 5 men in a wooden boat have just watched 40 tons of angry whale achieve brief aerial superiority and survive to continue the hunt. Your definition of bravery and insanity are becoming harder to distinguish. Boat 3 is closing in now. Tucker's crew has rowed themselves into position, and you see them preparing for a second strike. 2 harpoons in 1 whale means double the holding power, double the drag on the creature, and theoretically double the chances of survival if one line parts. Silver is in the bow, harpoon raised, and the boat is gliding in on momentum toward the whale, that's now visible again as a dark shape just below the surface. The second harpoon strikes. You don't see it happen, but you see the result. The whale's reaction is immediate and even more violent than before. The tail comes up and crashes down within feet of Boat 3, and from here it looks like the boat simply ceases to exist for a moment, lost in the explosion of white water. Then it emerges, somehow still intact, the crew bailing frantically while maintaining their grip on the rope that's now paying out at speed. 2 boats, 2 harpoons, 1 very angry whale that's now dragging both of them in different directions. The ropes are taut, you can see that even from here, stretching between the boats and the whale like lethal guidelines that could snap and whip back with killing force at any moment. The whale surfaces again, blows, the spout tinged pink now, which you realise with horror is blood from internal damage, and then sounds again, pulling both boats forward. The hunt continues beyond your clear vision, as the whale drags its pursuers toward the horizon. You're left at the rail, hands cramping from gripping too hard, stomach churning from the violence and the scale and the casual way that creature could have killed 5 or 10 men and didn't. Not because it chose mercy, but because it got lucky with its thrashing. Well, the captain says calmly, lowering his telescope, that's whaling for you. Now we wait to see if they finish it before it finishes them. You keep watching the distant boats, now barely visible specks being towed by a dying animal that doesn't understand economics, doesn't care about your lay, and definitely didn't sign up for any of this. Welcome to the brutal reality of how lamp oil gets harvested from creatures that never threatened anyone until someone decided their bodies were worth money. The horror isn't that it's happening. The horror is that everyone here thinks this is normal, just another day at work, completely routine. The horror is that you're starting to think they might be right. The waiting is its own special torture. You're stationed at the rail, eyes straining toward the horizon where the boats have become barely visible dots, and the only information you have is what the lookout shouts down every few minutes. Still fast, both boats holding. Whales slowing. The updates are clinical, stripped of the drama that you can't see but know is happening out there. Men in boats dealing with a wounded, desperate animal that could kill them at any moment. Time loses meaning when you're watching and waiting. The sun climbs higher. Your legs ache from standing. Other sailors maintain the ship, adjusting sails to keep the patients positioned optimally for boat recovery. But you're locked at the rail like you've been nailed there. The captain occasionally checks through his telescope, mutters assessments you only half understand, and otherwise projects an air of calm that must be learned because nobody's naturally calm when their boats are miles away dealing with a fighting whale. Finally, the lookout calls down. They've lanced it. Whale's in its flurry. The flurry is what happens when a whale is dying. Its final, desperate thrashing as massive trauma catches up with biology. Even from here, even at this distance, you can see the disturbance in the water, a churning chaos that marks where 40 tons of whale is experiencing the last moments of its life. The boats are backed off, maintaining distance, letting the creature exhaust itself in its death throes because getting close to a dying whale's tail is suicide. Here's your mainstream historical fact about the killing process. The kill lance, a long iron blade mounted on a wooden pole, had to penetrate deep enough to reach the whale's lungs or heart, a target buried beneath feet of blubber and muscle. The strike required getting within arm's reach of an animal that could destroy the boat with one movement, timing the thrust perfectly as the whale surfaced and hoping the lance found something vital. Many whales took multiple lance strikes before dying, a brutal process that could last hours and used up the crew's strength and nerve in equal measure. The whale goes still. You see it even from here, the sudden absence of motion, the way the dark shape on the water stops thrashing and just floats, dead, transformed from a living creature into a floating resource, 40 tons of valuable raw material waiting to be processed. The boats move in cautiously, and you see tiny figures working with rope, securing the carcass for the long tow back to the ship. The captain lowers his telescope. Mr. Sherman, prepare to receive the whale, get the cutting tackle rigged, fire the try-works, and ready the crew for processing. It'll be alongside within the hour and I want to start cutting immediately. That carcass won't stay fresh forever. The ship transforms again, this time from hunting vessel to floating processing plant. The try-works, that brick furnace you noticed earlier, gets fired up and soon smoke is rising from the deck. The cutting tackle, a system of ropes and pulleys designed to handle massive weight, gets rigged from the mainmast. Specialized tools emerge from storage, long-handled cutting spades, hooks, gaffs, and blades that look like they were designed to dismember giants, which functionally is exactly what they're for. Here's your quirky detail about whale processing. The rendering process happened on deck, not below, because the smell and mess were too overwhelming to contain indoors. This meant the entire ship would reek of burning blubber for weeks. The smoke would coat everything in a greasy film, and the deck would become slippery with oil and blood. Ships returning from successful whaling voyages could be identified from miles downwind by their distinctive, horrific smell. Sailors' clothes would be so saturated with whale oil that they'd be nearly waterproof, but also essentially unwearable in polite society. You were about to become permanently stained, literally and figuratively, by your chosen profession. The boats return in a slow procession, towing the massive carcass between them. It takes nearly an hour of hard rowing to bring the whale alongside the ship, and even then the scale is staggering. The creature lies in the water parallel to the patients, and it's nearly as long as the ship itself, maybe 80 feet of dead whale, already starting to bloat from internal gases, floating grey-brown in the water like some prehistoric creature that wandered into the wrong era. The boats come alongside first, the exhausted crews climbing back aboard with the expression of people who've just completed a marathon while being chased by something that could eat them. Tucker's face is flushed, his hands are rope-burned, and he's grinning like an absolute madman. 65 barrel bull at least, he announces. Clean strike, smooth run, only took 3 lance thrusts to finish him. Textbook hunt. You look at his textbook hunt floating in the water, a dead animal the size of a house, bleeding from multiple wounds, attracting the first curious sharks, and try to reconcile this with any definition of smooth you understand. But the crew's celebrating, clapping shoulders, already reliving the highlights, so apparently this went well by whaling standards. Nobody died. The boats didn't capsize, the whale didn't sink before they could secure it. Success metrics are different out here. The cutting begins immediately. Men you didn't know had this skill grab the long-handled spades and position themselves on a narrow platform rigged over the whale's body. They start cutting, not delicate surgical cuts, but massive slices that remove strips of blubber in sections called blanket pieces. Each piece is maybe a ton of blubber, hooked to the cutting tackle, and hoisted aboard while the whale is simultaneously rolled in the water to expose fresh cutting surface. It's brutal, efficient, and produces more blood and grease than you imagined could come from one animal. The tryworks fire roars, heating the massive iron pots used to render blubber into oil. The first pieces go in, chunks of fat cut into smaller sections called Bible leaves because they supposedly resemble pages. They melt, releasing oil that gets ladled into cooling tanks, then into storage barrels. The smoke is thick, black, acrid, carrying the smell of burning fat that coats your throat and makes your eyes water. This will continue for hours, possibly days, until the entire whale is processed. You're given a blade and assigned to help cut Bible leaves, basically slicing blubber into thin pieces that'll render more efficiently. Your hands are immediately covered in oil and blood. The deck is slippery. The smell is indescribable. Burnt fat mixed with raw meat, mixed with ocean water, mixed with smoke. You're working alongside men who do this routine like it's normal, chatting about the hunt while elbow deep in whale parts. Historians still argue whether the brutal efficiency of whale processing represented impressive industrial skill or barbaric exploitation. But from your position cutting blubber on a blood-slicked deck while smoke chokes the air, the distinction feels academic. This is the reality behind the lamp oil. The actual work of transforming living creature into commodity requires blood, smoke, exhaustion, and the ability to look at something dead and see only its economic value. The sun setting by the time you finish your shift at the cutting board. The whales may be half processed, the tryworks are still burning, and you're covered head to toe in a mixture of blood, oil, and smoke residue that you'll probably never completely wash out. Your first full day aboard the Patience is ending the way it began, with exhaustion, discomfort, and the growing realization that you've signed up for years of this. You look at the sunset, beautiful despite everything, painting the smoke-stained sky in oranges and purples, and feel the ship rock gently beneath your feet. The routine has begun. The voyage has truly started. This is your life now. The processing continues into the evening, but your watch is finally, mercifully done, and you're released to find what rest you can in the forecastle below. The sounds of work fade gradually as you descend. The splash of blubber hitting water, the shouts of men coordinating heavy lifts, the crackling roar of the tryworks fire burning through the night. All of it grows distant, muffled by wooden decks and your own exhaustion. You find your hammock waiting, that swinging canvas cocoon that's become as close to home as anything you have now. The forecastle is already filling with other off-watch sailors, men settling into their own routines of rest and quiet conversation, voices low and tired, speaking of the day's hunt with the satisfaction of work successfully completed. Someone's already snoring, that deep rhythmic sound that's becoming as familiar as breathing. You ease yourself into the hammock, letting it wrap around you, feeling the gentle sway as the ship rocks in the evening swell. Your muscles ache with that bone-deep tiredness that comes from honest labour, the kind of exhaustion that makes sleep feel less like a luxury and more like gravity pulling you down into soft darkness. The smell of whale smoke has followed you below, clinging to your clothes and hair, but even that is fading into the background of sensation as your body begins shutting down its awareness of anything except the need for rest. Outside, beyond the wooden walls, the ocean continues its eternal conversation with the ship. Soft slaps of water against the hull, the gentle creaking of timbers settling into the night's rhythm. Above deck, men are still working, still rendering the whale into barrels of oil that will light lamps in distant cities you'll never visit. But that's their concern now, not yours. Your breathing slows, deepens, matching the rise and fall of the ship on gentle swells. The darkness is complete and comfortable, wrapping around you like a second blanket. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the ship's bell marking the hour. but the sound seems to come from very far away, already part of the dream you're falling into rather than the reality you're leaving behind. The hammock sways, gentle and endless, rocking you towards sleep with the patience of the ocean itself. Tomorrow will bring new watches, new work, new challenges on this voyage that's only just begun. But tomorrow is a distant country, impossibly far from this moment of perfect, exhausted peace. Your eyes close. The ship breathes around you. The voyage continues while you drift away on tides of sleep, carried gently into dreams of stars and water, and the endless rocking motion that will follow you even into unconsciousness, until you can no longer tell whether you're awake or sleeping, whether the motion is the ship or your own heartbeat, whether you're floating on ocean or simply floating.